Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's Wednesday. It's the middle of the week, even though it doesn't feel like it because we had Monday off. It is time for the midweek rundown. And Brian, we have a lot of different topics to discuss today. So,
Yes.
recently ESPN just released an article basically putting all 138 FBS quarterback situations into tiers. We're going to kind of react to that, talk through some of the tiers that have broken down, some of the players that fall within there. And then we're switching our focus to Notre Dame. Recently, the Notre Dame recruiting has been heating up. They just landed Jackson Vaughn yesterday, another big-time commit from New Jersey. So we're going to kind of broaden the scope, talk big view, why Notre Dame recruiting has been going so well lately. Then we're going to talk about some of the summer arrivals that'll be coming here on campus in the next couple of weeks. They're going to be making a big impact this season. Very much looking forward to that conversation. And then a really fun one in part 4 of today's show, Brian, talking about the best Notre Dame teams of the last 25 years. And there is a certain criteria that we kind of had to lay out to rank these teams, or else we would just be talking about the most fun that we had in any given season, or, what was our favorite player from those teams. Those are factors. But going to be a very interesting conversation nonetheless. And then if we got time for it today, folks, we are going to wrap it up with the daily mailbag. Focus your questions on some of the topics that we talked about today: quarterback tiers, Notre Dame recruiting, talk college football landscape, all those fun things. But it's going to be a jam-packed show today, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, as am I. It's going to be a blast. A lot of great topics today, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Going to be a lot of fun. So, and then the big topic came up right before the show started. There was a proposal, a bill that was released by Ted Cruz, who's a Republican from Texas, and Maria Cantwell, who's a Democrat from the state of Washington, that is sort of meant to be a fix for college football. Trevor and I were looking over that. There's a lot of things we like, some things we don't. But we're going to wait till tomorrow to discuss that because we both want to spend a lot more time really diving into the bill and formulating our thoughts, man. So end of May, and we're still just jam-packed news and information, obviously coming off of the Jackson Vaughn commitment yesterday. So, man, I'm excited and ready to dive into this stuff.
Well, let's do it, man. Let's talk about this ESPN article. It was written by David Hale. And basically what this article does is it ranks all 138 FBS quarterback situations before the 2026 season. And, when I first read that article, I was like, okay, we're probably going to be like 5-6 tiers broken down. No, there's 25 tiers. And so we don't have enough time to dive into every single tier, but there are some things that we agreed with. Overall, Brian, before we kind of dive into the individual tiers, you and I talked a lot about this article before the show today, and there wasn't really anything that we saw within this list that we were like, this is blasphemous. How could you put this player here? Why would this tier be called this? All in all, I think it was a pretty solid article.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously, look, Trev, there's always going to be things we don't agree with. There's never, I don't know that I've ever read an article where I'm like, well, there's been some narrow topic articles that I agree with everything they're saying because they're arguing for like one thing. It's like, well, this argues for this is why Notre Dame should be independent. And, okay, I might agree with that, but there's always things you're going to disagree with. And there's certainly things here that we'll disagree with and we'll dive into. But I think the one big picture takeaway, number one, is I think this is a solid ranking. Like, as I skimmed through it, the one thing I read about CJ Carr was really negative. And I was like, oh, come on. I was like, all right, chill, read the rest. And then you see other parts that are like really positive, and you realize that they do that with a lot of different guys. And I'm not a huge David Hale fan normally. He likes to take shots at Notre Dame, but I thought overall this was a fair article, and the things that obviously we disagree with, not necessarily Notre Dame related, but other articles that we're going to discuss. But I think the one thing that this showed, Trevor, is it just cemented our opinion. Let me rephrase. In my view, it cemented the opinion that you and I have about college football this year, which is it is a loaded year at quarterback in college football. I mean, we're like this dude's in tier 15. This guy's a really good player, It has a chance to be a great year in college football. And when it comes to quarterback play. And that's why for Notre Dame, it's so important that they have a CJ Carr on their team, because when it's a great year in college football quarterback, if you don't have a great quarterback, it's going to be tougher. And we've pointed to this in the past. Notre Dame's 2018 playoff team, Notre Dame's 2020 playoff team, when you've got Ian Book, who's a nice, good, solid quarterback, did a lot of good things in Notre Dame. But when he's in a playoff where he's got to go against Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, and Kyler Murray one year, and then in another year, it's Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and Mac Jones, you better be better everywhere else or you're going to be in trouble. And they weren't. And so now these teams are better in a lot of ways for Notre Dame than those teams were, especially 2020. But the fact that you have a quarterback that talent-wise, which, you got to be careful talking about CJ Carr's talent because it might send JD Pickle into a tizzy, and he might say some dumb things in his response. But sorry, I gotta call him that. But the reality is they do have a very talented quarterback, but it's going to be important because they're not alone. This isn't a year where it's like there's two quarterbacks head and shoulders above everybody else. There's a lot of really good quarterbacks. So it's certainly good for Notre Dame that they have one of those many really talented quarterbacks. And it's going to see how it all shakes out. Like who regresses, who steps up, who doesn't take the jump that we thought. It's all that stuff's going to be fun. But in the offseason, just kind of looking at this and saying, boy, I don't know that I agree with that. But like you said, when it's a deep year, it can be harder to rank them. It's easy when it's like there's two guys who are good and then everybody else is just kind of okay. And this is a much, much different year. Like, it wasn't that long ago that if you'd have looked at our top 10 quarterback rankings, I'm like, dude, half that list would not be in our top 10. Over half that list would not be in our top 10 this year. It's going to be it's going to make for what I think is going to be a really, really fun year for college football. And by the way, we are going to do a mailbag today. I would love it if you guys would stick to kind of the topics we're going to discuss today. But if there's some other stuff you want to ask about, what we won't address, just so you know, is we are not going to address the release from Ted Cruz and Maria Cantwell today. We're going to get into that tomorrow. But go and throw those mailbag questions in there, Trev, and I'm ready for us to get rocking and rolling.
Yeah, to kind of build off of what you were talking about, Notre Dame relative to the playoff field at the quarterback position, it's really important to level off that playing field, especially when you're talking about the postseason. The complete inverse of what you're talking about in 2018 and 2020 is look at 2024. Notre Dame, there wasn't a sizable gap in quarterback play. Riley Leonard was going up against Will Howard and Nico and Sam Levitt and Maddox Madsen and Drew Allard. There was no one of those quarterbacks.
Gunnar Stockton, yeah.
Right. Quinn Ewers. There was no quarterback that we looked at. It's like, oh, yeah, that guy's clearly head and shoulders above everybody else. But you could have said that in 2018 or 2019 or 2020. And that's why it's important. But it's cool to see a Notre Dame quarterback up in that tier one. I like how he broke it down because he broke it down into tier 1A and tier 1B. Tier 1A was Notre Dame with CJ Carr, Texas with Arch Manning, Ole Miss with Trinidad Chambliss, Miami with Darian Mensah. But then in tier 1B, the title of the tier is great, but also has Jeremiah Smith. And that's where Julian Sain came into that conversation.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting, Trev. And so, like, as we dive into tier one, I agree with just kind of looking through it. I agree with CJ Carr being in that list. I agree with Arch Manning being in that list. I agree with Trinidad Chambliss being in that list. I'm not sure I'm quite on board with Darian Mensah being in that list. I can live with Darian Mensah being in that list. What I had a problem with is him being in that list, but Dante Moore not being in the list. And this is what made it interesting. So he says in tier one, he said for tier one, basically 25 was a first step towards a vast future. They were excellent and bigger things are ahead. For quarterbacks in tier two, we've got a pretty good idea of who they are. They're very good and have been for a while. How much better can they be in 2026? So when I look at Jaden Maeva in tier two, I agree completely. When I look at Sam Levitt in tier two, agree completely. And I think there's some other quarterbacks that I would have argued belong in tier two, but that's another point. But I didn't understand Dante Moore being in tier two, but Mensah being in tier one. Darian Mensah has way more experience as a college quarterback than Dante Moore. Dante was a half-a-year starter at UCLA 3 years ago as a true freshman, whereas Darian Mensah is a full 2-year starter who was a starter at the Power 4 at the G5 level at Tulane, and then obviously jumps it to Duke last year, throws for almost 4,000 yards last year. I'm not saying that I think Darius Mensah has peaked. I think there's a chance he could have better production this year with better players. But honestly, even at Miami with better players, how much better is he going to get than 3,900 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions? So it's not so much that I have a problem with Darian Mensah being in tier one. I think I had him 6th in my top 10 quarterbacks list. I think 5th or 6th. It's more so, how is he there and Dante Moore's a tier below? As if like Dante Moore can't get any better. Not to mention, one of the arguments I would use for why there's a case that Darian Mensah can produce better and be even better is his supporting cast will be better. He brings his best player with him from Duke and Cooper Barcotti, but then he also he was walking to a situation with Malachi Toney, a really good running back room. You've got Elijah Lofton stepping up. You bring in Cam Vaughn. You get in Van Jacobs coming in from South Carolina. Like, dude, this is a loaded roster. Well, isn't that also true for Dante Moore, who had to deal with a ton of injuries last year? You got DeCorian Moore's going to be a year older. Get Evan Stewart back. They're really talented. 2 freshman running backs are coming back. They lose their tight end, who was really good, Kenyon Sadiq, but Jeremy Johnson comes back, who's a really good player. They got a transfer. Didn't Andrew Olesh, I believe, transferred to Oregon as well? And you're like, well, yeah, but, Oregon's got a new look offensive line. Yeah, so does Miami. I just didn't understand how you're going to argue that if tier 1 means – if you just wanted to say, I think Darian Mensah is better than Dante Moore, I'd be like, all right, okay, we can agree to disagree. But to act as if Dante Moore just this is what he is and there's nowhere to go with up, but Darian Mensah, who's been who's thrown for almost 6,700 yards in his career is got room for growth, but Dante Moore, who's really only been a one-time starter at the Power 4 level, is who he is. That didn't make a lot of sense to me. That was my biggest pushback with tier 1 and tier 2 was the exclusion of Dante Moore from that list just didn't make a lot of sense to me. If you're going to argue that Darian Mensah belongs in tier 1, then you've got to argue that Dante Moore belongs in tier 2. It's almost like he's got them reversed. The argument he makes about Dante is exactly the argument I'd make about Darian Mensah. But, I would say I'd be cool with both of them being in that tier 1 category. What are your thoughts on that, Trev? That tier 1, tier 2 break?
Yeah, I think both players have an argument to be up there. I think, unfortunately, for Dante Moore, he's starting to see the effects of electing to forego the NFL draft and come back to college football for another year. It's just more time for people to pick apart the game and then sit there and dissect. It's like, oh, but is he tier 1? Is he tier 2? Because I guarantee you almost at this time last year, people would have put him at tier 2 or even in tier 1 because they're like, hey, the future's bright. Look at the roster that he has. He, got to learn for a year under Bo Nix and yada, 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 or under Dylan Gabriel. And so I think that kind of plays a part in it. We're even starting to see it in FanDuel, like Dante Moore's odds to win the Heisman Trophy just continue to go down and down. He just got passed up by Josh Hoover. And so there's a lot of different ingredients that kind of go into this. My biggest one was kind of the definition between tier 2 and tier 3. For tier 2, he talks about, he says it's splitting hairs a bit between tier 1 and tier 2, with the key difference being imagination. For the quarterbacks in tier 1, 2025 was a first step forward towards a vast future. They were excellent and bigger things are ahead. For quarterbacks in tier 2, pretty good idea of who they are. They've been pretty good for a while, but how good can they be in 26? And then with tier 3, it was like, these guys just are who they are. In my opinion, I think Jaden Maeva fits more in that category. Some of it, too, goes back to what Brian talked about. It's weird seeing Dante Moore and Jaden Maeva in the same tier of college quarterbacks because I don't put them there. I think Jaden Maeva is the definition of he is who he is. He's going on his 4th year as a starting quarterback at the college football level. So I don't know what more there is. It's like, yeah, maybe he makes a jump in year 4. I'm not under that assumption. But again, it's kind of splitting hairs because per the definition of what he said tier 2 was, I get it. I don't have much big beef there, but I just wouldn't put I wouldn't put Dante Moore and Jaden Maeva in the same category.
The thing he talks about, like the tier 3 teams, he says, he calls it the Sean Clifford zone. He's got 6 players. He goes, he was always somewhere between solid and quite good. Against teams that finished the year ranked, however, he was a woeful 4-11. This, of course, was the story for nearly every quarterback under James Franklin. And then he talks about Mateer, Stockton, or Reed. I'm like thinking, hold on a second. Explain to me again why Darian Mensah's not in this category then. I mean, didn't they lose to like multiple ranked teams last year, including like Tulane? Why isn't Jaden Maeva in this category? And you're going to put Gunnar Stockton in this category? Like, look, I get that Gunnar Stockton and Georgia lost to some ranked teams last year, but are we going to pretend like Gunnar Stockton doesn't have some really big wins as a starting quarterback? I mean, even the game, his first game he played in real minutes was the SEC championship game. When he entered the lineup, they were losing. So like, look, I mean, say what you want about Gunnar Stockton in tier 3, but he has a 35-10 victory over one of your tier 1A quarterbacks. He has another victory over one of your tier 1A quarterbacks and Trinidad Chambliss. Now, Trinidad got them back in the championship or in the playoffs. But it's not like Gunnar Stockton is the reason that they lost to Ole Miss in the playoffs. I mean, I thought Gunnar did some good things in that game, but he threw for 289 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 43-35 win over Ole Miss and Trinidad Chambliss. He went 24 of 29 and 4 touchdowns in a win over Texas. Oh, and by the way, Gunnar Stockton went 20 of 26 and threw 3 touchdown passes in the SEC championship game, a game they won by 3 touchdowns over a playoff team. Like, what are we talking about here? Why acting like Gunnar Stockton is like some of this mediocre quarterback that can't beat anybody? I didn't understand that at all. I mean, that was a little bit of a head scratcher to me that they had Gunnar Stockton in tier 3, and the argument being because they don't beat good teams. And I'm like, I think you have him confused. If that's true, what's the argument for having Sam Leavitt in tier 2?
Right.
I mean, he's got a similar record, has some good wins over over good teams. He was the starting quarterback when they beat Texas Tech last year. Was the quarterback in the Big 12 title game, but also has lost some games to those big teams. It was a very weird thing. Same thing with like Marcel Reed. What? Didn't Marcel Reed go on the road and get a win over Notre Dame and CJ Carr? There just was some weird stuff here where I'm like, hold on a second. You're going to argue that John Mateer hasn't beat anybody good, but you're going to then try to convince us last December that somehow Oklahoma had a playoff resume because of all their big wins, but now their starting quarterback doesn't belong there because they don't beat anybody. I'm like, what are you talking about here? What are you talking about? Says
let's
Mateer,
not forget
Stockton,
that
and
John
Reed
Mateer
are 0-4 in the playoffs. Like, okay, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, you could talk. I mean, he could talk about that all he wants to. I mean, look, let's call a spade here. CJ Carr's in tier 1A, and he has yet to play in a playoff game.
Neither has
Mensa is in tier 1A.
Neither has Arch Manning.
Yeah.
Well, Arch Manning's played in a playoff game, but it was as like a short yardage player in your 1A, your group 1A. Only one of those guys is in the playoffs, and that's Trinidad Chambliss at Ole Miss. Now, he is 1-1 against Gunnar Stockton. Then Darian Mensa's never been in the playoff. CJ Carr's never been in the playoff. Arch Manning's never started a game in the playoff. And Julian Sain's 0-for. Sam Leavitt's 0-for. Jaden Maeva's never been in the playoff. If we're going to base this off of playoff wins, another reason why Dante Moore belongs in the top conversation, because Dante Moore started 2 playoff games where his team won. So that's where I kind of had some issues, is like, hold on a second. We're going to punish these guys for getting to the playoffs while having them ranked behind guys who've never played in the playoffs. Seems kind of like a really lame argument to make. Like, I don't think those guys belong in the upper tiers, but that's a terrible reasoning to have them in that category. Like, why? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Marcel Reed just, was a big reason why Texas A&M even made the playoff last year. We're going to penalize them for that? And they lost to the team by 7 that made it to the title game, beat Notre Dame. Some of the reasoning was silly, like very silly. That was kind of my issue with this tier 3. It's almost like it was a backhanded compliment category.
Yeah.
It's like, hold on a second. Are you praising these guys or are you insulting these guys? It didn't make any sense. And then he goes on to say that Gunnar Stockton last year versus top 25 teams based on the SP Plus had 18 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 72% completion rate. Then what are we doing here? Then why are you putting him into a category which basically they don't win big games? It was that section to me really bothered me. I thought it was really silly. Really silly.
Yeah, that tier 3 ranking doesn't justify some of the other guys that they have ranked ahead. I guarantee if you go and look at the SP Plus rankings, Jaden Maeva's numbers don't look like what Gunnar Stockton's numbers did against ranked opponents. Same thing with Sam Leavitt. It was an odd ranking. I'm with you completely. The only other overall, I guess you could say, beef that I had with this ranking was in tier 6. They had this section titled "Welcome to the Big Leagues," and it was 3 players. 2 of them I agree with, and the other one it misses me. They had Byron Brown in from Auburn. Makes sense. He's coming up from the G6 level up to Auburn. Drew Mestemaker went from North Texas to Oklahoma State. But the third guy they had in there was Anthony Calandria at Nebraska. I think people are very quick to forget that Anthony Calandria started at Virginia. Like, you don't get welcome to the big leagues if you left and then now you're back again. We've already seen what Anthony Calandria is as a starting quarterback at the P4 level. And look, there's just this minute portion. I've started to see more hype get generated around Anthony Calandria. And I think it's just that portion of the college football fan base that is trying to will Nebraska into relevancy again. But Anthony Calandria is not it. I don't see him being a tier 6 quarterback, especially with some of the names that are behind, or some of the names that they just left out of the welcome to the big leagues. I can't coin this for my own, Brian, but when we were talking about it before the show, you said Colton Joseph should be on this list well before Anthony Calandria. You're muted, Brian.
Yeah, they got Colton Joseph down here in tier 15 in a category titled Everyone Gets Lucky Sometimes. And he says, I don't even know how he explains this. This doesn't even make any sense. He goes, the good news for folks at Rutgers, Iowa, Wisconsin, or Boston College is that there's really nowhere to go for the offense but up. It was bad last year. It's been bad for a while. The options for 2026 aren't markedly worse. And then he starts talking about like these quarterbacks is almost like they're insulting him. And he never explains why Colton Joseph is in this category. Like it makes no sense. Like why are we discussing, he says no player with at least 250 passes in the past 2 seasons averaged more air yards per throw in a season than Joseph last year. Okay. Like what then, like that's all you said about him and how that's going to benefit him. Then why are we not talking about him, to your point, Trevor, up here in tier 6, where where you're talking about these guys that have made the move from the G5 to the other one. The other part is that I hated about that, and we discussed this. Why is Anthony Calandria in this conversation? Are we just going to pretend like Anthony Calandria has been in the G5 his whole career and he's just now moving up to the Power 4 level? He spent his whole career, except for 1 year at UNLV, at the Power 4 level. He was a 2-year starter at Virginia and was very mediocre. I think he had like 20 interceptions in 2 years. I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were watching Notre Dame just baiting him into interception after interception. It was November of 2024. And they put him in the same category as Byron Brown and Drew Mestemaker while barely giving a notice to Colton Joseph down in tier 16. By the way, Colton Joseph rushed for more yards against Indiana by himself than any other of the 15 teams on Indiana's schedule did last year, including Ohio State, including Oregon, including Miami. He rushed for more yards by himself. And yet we're going to hype up Anthony Calandria as some sort of answer to their problems? No.
Well, and then it was even weirder because then when you get down to tier 8, the learning to fly players, he literally called it the poor man's tier 6, which I thought was interesting because Mason Heinchel's in that category.
Yeah.
Like Mason Heinchel's not learning to fly. Like he had a good year last year.
Right.
I mean, we were talking about that matchup before Notre Dame played him. It's like, this is a good quarterback.
Yeah.
Like this is a play. Like their offense got better when they benched Eli Holstein.
Yeah.
They did.
I mean, this is a kid that threw for 2,300 yards last year, Trev, and didn't start until what? I think his first start was game 3 for them last year. Actually, no, not even. He played on the 6th. He didn't start until October. His first start was against BC on October 4th.
Yeah. And he ripped them up.
Yeah. He had back-to-back 300-yard games, against BC and Florida State. Also threw for 400 yards against NC State. Threw for 300 yards against Stanford. So, yeah, it was a weird thing. And I'm telling you right now, I'm either going to look like an absolute genius for my view of Malik Washington, or people are going to be like, dude, I don't know what you were saying that everybody else saw. Like, what you weren't saying. Like, you're an idiot, Driscoll, because you kept hyping up Malik Washington and everybody else didn't think he was all that good and he ends up not being that good, then I'm going to look like an idiot. But having him down in tier 8 when with Julian Lewis from Colorado, with Kamario Taylor from Mississippi State, and Ethan Grunkmeyer, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And he said, consider tier 8 the poor man's tier 6 insofar as Bachmeier, Sago, Polutele, and Underwood represent the safest bets to make the leap from fresh-faced talent to outright superstar. Have you watched Bryce Underwood? Like, really? Like, with all due respect, Kamario Taylor was a much better player than Bryce Underwood was last year, and he only threw for 600 yards. I mean, it was like a no-brainer. I mean, he was terrible. Mason Heinchl last year threw for over 200, 300 yards. Malik Washington in the same exact league as Bryce Underwood last season passed for 2,900 yards and accounted for over 20 touchdowns. Like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Like, that makes no sense. It made no sense to have Bryce Underwood in that category with two guys who had very good seasons last year as true freshmen. I mean, Bear Bachmeier last year, and that was tier 5. Bear Bachmeier last year as a true freshman led his team to the college football playoff, or to the cusp of the college football playoff. They're a win from one win over Texas Tech in either game away from being a playoff team as a true freshman. And then the kid from Cal, I mean, look, Cal was one of those surprise teams last year that ended up making a bowl game, and a lot of it was because of that kid. He went out in the last game of the year where if they lose that game, they're a borderline bowl team at 6-6. They're just getting in maybe because there's not enough offers. He goes 31 of 40 for 330 yards and 4 touchdowns to knock SMU out of the ACC title game. Like, Bryce Underwood's never had a performance that sniffed that. In a win at Louisville, a ranked top 25 opponent, he went 30 of 47 for 323 yards. And this kid is all the way down here with Bryce Underwood. What are we talking about? This kid is way better than Bryce Underwood. And Malik Washington is not a safer bet than Bryce Underwood. I feel like sometimes these people just don't watch football and just like, oh yeah, he was ranked real high coming out of high school. He must be it. How is Kamario Taylor and Julian Lewis, who combined for about 1,200 yards last year, in the same category as Mason Heichel and Malik Washington? I don't understand it. Like, it makes no sense. Makes no sense to have him. He was a legitimate starter from day one at Maryland, and they're putting him in the same category. Like, Mason Heichel I could even buy because he stepped in later in the year, but Malik Washington was literally a day one starter for the entire year. I'll never understand that one, Trev. I'll never understand that one. It really makes no sense to me.
I'm with you. Last thing I'll say about this article, Brian, one tier that I do think that he nailed was tier 14, living dangerously. And basically it describes like quarterbacks that are kind of on the verge of falling off, and it's kind of their last opportunity to ascend up these tiers. And I think he nailed this one. DJ Lagway at Baylor, Ashton Daniels at Florida State, Caton Hauser at Illinois. You got Drake Lindsay at Minnesota, Nico at UCLA, Prabula and Holstein at Virginia. So I thought this was a really, really interesting list. I think this was one of the tiers that I think he got very much correct.
Yeah, I like that. I think those are all spot on, Trev. I guess, the one kid that I will push back on, though, there's one kid in that list that I don't think belongs in that list, and that is Drake Lindsay. His insertion doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Drake Lindsay was a redshirt freshman last year that had some very good moments for Minnesota. He, unlike all these other guys, other than Maddox Madsen, he hasn't transferred. He's at the school he started at. All these other guys are transfers. So his insertion there didn't make a lot of sense to me. You're talking about a guy that is, year one in the Big Ten, went 20, threw for 2,300 yards and accounted for 22 touchdowns. That's the only one that didn't make sense. One that I also, a category that I liked that I thought he did that I thought was very interesting was 13 coordinators making them interesting. I thought that was a very, you got Cutter Boley and Mikey Keene at Arizona State. How will they do with Kenny Dillingham, who's been a quarterback whisperer so far? Aiden Childs with Chip Kelly is going to be very fascinating. And then Gio Lopez of Wake Forest. I mean, I don't know that North Carolina's coordinator was the problem for Gio Lopez last year. I just don't think he's got the skill set to thrive at the Power 5 level, but it's going to a very intriguing offensive system. So I thought that one was very interesting, and was like, oh, there's some guys I think you can go in there, but I thought that list was very interesting as well.
Yeah, agreed, man. I think all in all, this was a very interesting list. Again, there's 25 tiers in here, which there's just not enough time of day to break it down. The thing that I found odd was, like, depending on the tier that you got to, it felt really backhanded. I thought that was really interesting. Talk about how everybody gets lucky sometimes. And, you were talking about Colton Joseph at Wisconsin. I thought that was kind of backhanded.
There's a lot of shade, lot of shade thrown at quarterbacks. And I thought that was a little bizarre. At the end of the day, Trev, biggest complaints, what would I would move Dante Moore up to tier 1. I feel like I felt like if you talk about the shade, like that's how I felt about Julian Sand. I thought that was a little unfair as well. Great, but also as Jeremiah Smith. And it's almost like he was saying, he was almost like, yeah, he's not that great. He's he's more about a product of Jeremiah Smith. And I'm like, well, I mean, you could say that about a lot of those guys in tier 1. I mean, CJ Carr's handing off to Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and throwing to Malachi Fields. Like, I mean, that's what good quarterbacks do. They have good players. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. I personally would have put Dante Moore up into that category. I think look, I'm going to stay on this. I think Sam Levitt deserves to be in a different category. I think he deserves to be in more of the, I'm trying to think of like what it would be, almost like the tier 14 that you were talking about in some ways. You could even argue he belongs there. I'm just trying to think of some of those ones because I don't know that we know for sure what we're going to get from him for a lot of reasons. The other tier that we didn't talk about, that I just want to briefly mention, is tier 4, better than you thought. He included Noah Fafiti, Connor Wegman, CJ Bailey, Kevin Jennings, and Damon Williams. I didn't love the fact that at first that they were in like the 4th tier, but I think he doesn't use the word tier properly, because some of these are like tiers. This is the top group, but some of these are groupings of similar quarterbacks with similar backgrounds that doesn't equate to a tier, but a grouping. But this tier I thought was interesting, but I do think he gets that right. That those are the list of quarterbacks that you and I have talked a lot about are some of the most underrated in college football.
Yeah,
Noah Fafiti, we've talked about. Connor Wegman's a guy that we felt was very underrated. CJ Bailey's a guy that we feel is very underrated. I was going to say Jeremiah Reed, but it's not. Jordan Reed from ESPN, who's someone we like, did a preview of like his favorite quarterbacks in the 2027 NFL draft, and he had CJ Bailey in there. So it's good to see somebody kind of seeing it the way that you and I see CJ Bailey, of this is a kid with a lot of potential and talent. Kevin Jennings, we view went from overrated to now underrated. And then, of course, Damon Williams, you and I would argue, is probably the most underrated quarterback in college football this year, other than Malik Washington, because Malik is just not getting any of the love. But I thought that was interesting for sure. And then I also thought putting Sean Clifford and Devin Dampier in the same category makes no sense. No sense.
Yeah, I thought that was odd too. The only things that I would change about that list, if he's adamant about keeping Jaden Maeva in tier 2, then you got to bump up Dante Moore. But I think Jaden Maeva is more of a tier 3 quarterback in my opinion. And then the only other thing that I would change is Anthony Calandria is not in the same conversation as Byron Brown or Drew Bestemaker.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're onto something with. I think he grouped the quarterbacks first and then titled the tiers as to what he thinks fits all of those quarterbacks instead of defining the tiers first.
Yeah, and then putting guys.
And then,
that, right?
Yeah, I think he kind of just did it in reverse order.
I don't know that that tiers is just a word to really. Like to me, tiers, like when we did tiers the other day about college football programs, like, okay, here's the best, here's the next best, and here's the next best. And this was more about, like I said, he starts with tiers, then he turns into this odd who has got a similar background or whatever that is not in no way supports the top 2 tiers. That's what I thought was a little bit weird. But overall, is a fun read. And I thought we should do something like that. I was like, dude, that'd take forever. We're not going to do anything like that. We'll do a kind of a re-ranking of our quarterbacks as we get into the season and backfields and things like that. So we'll have a lot of that college football stuff coming up. But I thought this was a fun, interesting conversation that just, again, highlights how deep this year is going to be. It really, really is going to be a big year. Really going to be a big year quarterback. And there's going to be some breakout players. He had like a freshman only category in there. He had like a top G5 category. Another last interesting one I forgot to bring up, Trev, the one that had Avery Johnson in it. Let me find that one. I thought that one was pretty interesting as well. Crafty veterans. It's got Avery Johnson and Lenora Sellers and Alonzo Barnett and then Steve Angeli. And I'm like, wait, what? Steve Angeli has 5 career starts. Not even. Does he even have that?
I thought he started 4 at Syracuse and then 1 for Notre Dame in the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl. I couldn't remember if Clemson was their 3rd or 4th game.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I keep forgetting that he started that game against Oregon State. You got the Syracuse ones right. The one I got wrong was the. I keep forgetting about the Sun Bowl. But yeah, I don't know that I would put Steve as a crafty veteran with a bunch of run throw guys. That one didn't make a lot of sense to me. I was like, okay. Yeah. One of these doesn't look like the others, but I thought that was pretty interesting, very interesting. You brought some up too. That position that battle, but at South Florida between Michael Van Buren and Luke Kromenhoek is going to be very interesting this year. Waiting is the hardest part. You had Kenny Minchie, that was another interesting one. I thought the Austin Simmons one was a little bit odd having him in there. It's like that like dude has started games. Yeah, it's going to be very fascinating. Looking forward to it. But yeah, that was I enjoyed the read. I know we criticized a lot of it, but I enjoyed the read. I just thought it could have been maybe labeled a little better besides tears.
Agreed. Brian, let's talk about recruiting up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And obviously Notre Dame has been red hot on the recruiting trail over the last couple of seasons. They had the #1 ranked recruiting class in the country in 2026, according to On3. And they're off to one heck of a start in the 2027 class. I think I read like 247 Sports, I think has them like 3rd. On3 has them like 7th or something. They just signed a big commitment from Jackson Vaughn yesterday, big-time defensive end who reclassified from 28 to 27 out of New Jersey. And so what we wanted to do is kind of broaden the scope a little bit and talk about why Notre Dame is recruiting so well. And, there's obvious factors in here that we're going to dive into. We're going to talk about the Marcus Freeman effect, but it's one thing for us to sit here and talk about, dude, this team is red hot, man. Marcus Freeman and Mike Martin and Carter Allman and that whole staff, they're absolutely cooking right now. But we wanted to take some time and talk about the why behind it.
Yeah, I think the reason why I thought this conversation was interesting, because I think that Notre Dame fans recognize that recruiting is better. And I think they recognize some of the reasons why Notre Dame is recruiting better. But I think the reality is that the level of success is due to a lot of different things coming together at the same time. And if they're not all present, it's going to slowly kind of knock them down from where they are. Where if one of these things is missing, maybe instead of having the #2 class, have a #4 class. If 2 or 3 of those things are missing, maybe they fall to 6 or 7. If 3 or 4 of those things are missing, maybe they fall to 10 or 11, that kind of thing. And they all go together. And I thought it'd be very interesting for us to really discuss why. Because when you look at the way that Notre Dame is recruiting, I mean, this is taking like the best classes from Charlie Weiss, putting them into one, and Notre Dame's doing that annually now. Meaning like you take like the 07 and 08 offensive classes and then mix them with like the 09 defensive class that had Manti and, some guys like that. And maybe the 08 class is close to that, but like they had, came up short here, there. You just haven't seen this kind of recruiting for a long, long time, where just year after year after year, Notre Dame is landing elite players. And there's a one thing on here that I'll mention that I didn't put on our rundown after Marcus Freeman, because it's part of Marcus Freeman success, but I want to make sure that I separate it and give credit to the other coaches when we get there. But there's not just one. It's not, just Marcus Freeman. Oh, it's NIL. Like, no, it's a lot of things. Somebody in the chat just said ND spending money. I mean, I get that, right? And we'll get to that, but there's other teams spending money that aren't winning. It's really a lot of different things, and I do think that Notre Dame is a unique place. One thing I've always said, 2 things I've always said. Number 1, Notre Dame can absolutely recruit at an elite level. Always could. Number 2, it's going to be harder to do it at Notre Dame than it is at other places. Some of those things have been kind of eliminated, but it's still harder because of different factors. And so what we wanted to do is really get into obviously recognizing that what we're seeing here is elite. And it's not just the 27 class or just the 26 and 27. It's 25, it's 24, it's 23. We argued, Ryan and I used to argue this when he and I were doing this stuff together. You and I have argued this since you and I have started doing shows together, that the 23 and 24 recruiting classes were woefully underrated. And we're seeing that now because those guys are the ones dominating the preseason All-American lists and the All-American lists, and they're dominating a Notre Dame team that people believe is a top 5 program. And we've just seen it continue. Even sort of the disappointing, quote unquote, disappointing 25 class relative to all the other classes still brought in some really good football players. I mean, it's, you look at that and, Will Black's going to be starting out of that group this year. Matty Augustine has emerged from that group. Chris Burgess is a guy we're super high on. Matt Faramo, Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary. There's some really good players from that group as well. So when you break it down, Trev, it's like there's a lot of reasons why, and we just kind of did as part of our rundown, really dive into what the reasons are and discuss their level of importance. And the direction we're going to go is not, okay, here's reason number 1 and here's reason number 7. They kind of build on each other. And the key is going to be for Notre Dame, you've got to make sure that all these areas remain strong moving forward. As people come and go, assistants are going to come and go. Someday Marcus Freeman won't be here, whether it's in a year, 5 years, 10 or 20. There will come a day where he's not the head coach of Notre Dame anymore. He could be Joe Paterno and coach here for 40 years, and eventually he's still going to be done. It'll probably be when I'm long gone, but you know what I mean? But the point is he's going to leave someday. Okay, then replace him with somebody that can effectively do the things that he did in their way. But you've got to make sure all these ingredients are there if Notre Dame's going to be successful. And if they are all there, then Notre Dame is going to remain a recruiting juggernaut. And so I wanted to dive into those things, Trev. And there's different types. There's kind of a big picture. There's specific coaching aspects. There's, results driven and some off the field things that aren't necessarily specific to football, but things that give the football team the resources they need to be successful. So let's dive into those.
Without a doubt. I mean, when you start up at the top, Brian, you have to just talk about Notre Dame as an institution. Notre Dame is Notre Dame, and it's always going to swing a big stick and carry a big draw. It's who they are. They're one of the most recognized names in sports. I mean, you don't even have to talk to – you could be talking to a fan of anything. They know what Notre Dame is.
Yeah.
They might not necessarily know what UCLA is, depending on what sport you're talking about. They might not know what – Clemson is, depending on what kind of sport you're talking to. Everybody knows what Notre Dame is. There's a reputation that comes with that school. It's academic excellence. It's, the history of competing for championships. And that's going to be your foundation. And I know we'll get into coaching here in a second. Like you said, it all builds on each other, but it's important now that the person that is driving the ship and the person that is in charge of driving that success bought into what this university can provide people. Because now over the last decade, we've seen 2 different types of coaches, people that want to go against the current of Notre Dame and people that want to flow with the current of Notre Dame. And one is working out significantly better than the other one. And Marcus Freeman has done a really good job of buying into that. But Brian, where you have to start is with Notre Dame. They as an institution will always carry a big weight amongst a lot of kids in high school, and especially with the parents.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question. There's no question. And this is the one constant that's kind of been there is Notre Dame is Notre Dame. One of the keys to what we're seeing from Marcus Freeman, and here's one of the keys why 2026 is so important and why I believe a long, like a deep playoff run is important, because what Marcus Freeman has done is he's made the tradition of Notre Dame relevant again. And the Notre Dame's tradition in history has always been relevant to Notre Dame fans and college football diehards, but to recruits, because this is a recruiting show. So there's different levels of relevance. Notre Dame has always been relevant in fandom of college football, because even when they were down, people loved taking shots at them. Well, nobody takes shots when UNLV's down or when Purdue's down or when other programs are down. It's always Notre Dame that people love to take shots at because they're relevant. But that doesn't mean they're relevant to 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds who aren't necessarily the fans that we are. They're just really talented football players that are recruits. This is a recruiting segment. So that's why we use the word relevance so importantly, because it has been a long time since Notre Dame was really, truly a national title contender. But even without that, the uniqueness of Notre Dame has always been a draw to a lot of kids. It's why even when Notre Dame had a head coach who didn't work hard in recruiting, or had a head coach who did work hard in recruiting but didn't have a lot to sell, they were able to still go out and be in the game. Now, they would lose recruits but they were in the game because Notre Dame is Notre Dame. And so I think that's an important piece to this. And that's why I do believe that what Marcus Freeman has done in recent years, and if he can continue to do this, is huge, because now we don't have to point back to, remember 1993 or remember in 05 with Brady Quinn. We can point to recent seasons, assuming this year goes well. Notre Dame disappoints again this year. Then we have to say, well, they had that one great run, but outside of that, they haven't lived up to their expectations. I think you and I both believe that they are going to, have a very good season, but that's a big piece of this. But Notre Dame is still Notre Dame, and it's still a unique draw, and it's still a unique campus. It's still a unique in what it emphasizes compared to other places. It's still unique in its independence from a football standpoint. It's still unique, and it's the only team that has their own network now. The NBC also now has the Big Ten. Yeah, but it's the Big Ten. It's not Ohio State. It's the Big Ten and Notre Dame. And so I think those things are always true, and they will always be true. And those things have been so far pretty timeless. And number two, Trev, is you have to look at a big reason is Marcus Freeman and all that entails.
Without a doubt. I mean, Marcus Freeman has impacted the recruiting landscape at Notre Dame for the better. I mean, in every aspect. He's impacted Notre Dame in every different aspect. Recruiting goes a long way to winning things like championships and titles and competing for major bowls. And, we talk about how in a week in 2024, he accomplished more in 1 week in the postseason than what Brian Kelly did in 11 years. Part of the ways that you do that is continuing to stack classes and attract top-level talent from the transfer portal and from high school recruiting. He did that once again this past season, and they're the favorites on FanDuel to win the national championship in 2026. But I wrote an article the other day, and it was talking about how Notre Dame has done such a perfect job recently of blending the rich tradition of their school and blending it with the new age of what college football is now. Notre Dame has a lot to offer you. And in order to do that, you need the right guy. Now, I'll be honest. I did not think that I was going to see the day where the Notre Dame head coach was cool. I mean, because let's be real. Brian Kelly was not cool. Even when I liked him, I never looked at him and was like, that guy's cool. I was like, he's the head coach at Notre Dame. I respect him because he's the head coach at Notre Dame. But I never looked at him and was like, oh, he's cool. He does cool things. Marcus Freeman is very cool. And I know that might sound empty to some people, but there's a lot of kids that get drawn to wanting to play for a player's coach. They want to be modernized. And Notre Dame has done such a tremendous job recently of, you can go visit their campuses and you see the Golden Dome and you see Touchdown Jesus and you see the house that Rockne built. And then they also show you the Shields Family Hall. They also show you the Guglielmino Athletic Complex. They show you their new updated stadium. And so they're doing just a great job in all ways. And a lot of that goes to Marcus Freeman. He's turned this program around.
I also think when I think Marcus Freeman, I also think he specifically is a dynamic recruiter.
Yes.
I mean, he is an elite recruiter by himself. He works hard at it. He connects well with families. He connects well with players. There's the joke, oh, he's a good-looking guy, so moms love him. Well, you know why else moms love him if we're being serious about it and not doing the funny, our coach is hotter than your coach stuff, you know what I mean? It's like, no, it's because moms trust him to take care of their sons because they meet him, they see the genuineness. To me, moms can have a very strong impact on a recruit. And sometimes it's not for the positive. There's a couple recruits that we know of whose moms are steering them in a wrong direction because they're steering them towards agents that we don't believe have the young men's best interest at heart. But moms are going to have a big say in recruiting, whether they're come from 2-parent homes, 1-parent homes, 4-parent homes, if there's, 2 sets of parents that are involved that are both remarried, every dynamic is different. But the reality is these moms especially respect Marcus Freeman because when they meet him, they see the genuineness of him and they see how he interacts with his players. They see how he interacts with recruits. And there's hey, I think this guy is going to look after my son on and off the field. And that's something that's huge. We talked about this with Olu Olubabola, Trev, when he visited, how, we've shared the story in our recruiting shows where Notre Dame didn't think that they killed that visit. They thought they did decide, we don't think we're going to have a shot. He came with his agent and he wasn't very talkative. Well, they didn't know is he was watching everything. One of the big things he talked about after he committed was, and he said this on the record, he also had, Sean talked to his agent, Sean Davis talked to his agent, and it was relayed through his agent as well, that he was really struck and impacted by watching how Marcus Freeman interacts with his own players, even outside of the spotlight, on the field, during practice and things like that. And that impacts players a lot, and it impacts parents a lot, especially moms, because, dads care about that stuff too. But, dads, like for my dad, it was about, I'm teaching my son to be a man, to think for himself, to make this, to do things on his own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My mom cared about those things, but then my mom also had the standpoint of, I want to make sure he's surrounding himself with, dad's the build you up guy. Mom's let's make sure the village around him is also strong. You know what I mean? And those are both very important. And so that's why I also think that Marcus Freeman's had successful, because he connects with parents from a recruiting spin standpoint, but just from a genuine standpoint, on top of the work ethic and the messaging, they always just seem to know how to hit the right notes with people. And then the other part, as you mentioned, is the job he's done as head coach is a reason why a lot of things are going to follow after this are positives for Notre Dame. And then, of course, before we move on to those, this is what I wanted to kind of give a note to, is he has hired, for the most part, very strong recruiters at Notre Dame. Mike Denbrock's a strong recruiter. Dylan McCullough was a strong recruiter, as is J1 Sider. We can debate whether or not he hires position coaches who are the best of the best coaching their position everywhere. We'll find that out, but you're going to have to – if you're going to – look, there's things with Joe Rudolph I like and don't like, and we'll see how certain – but that's always going to be true. There was guys that Harry Hiestand went after that I didn't understand why they went after that guy. But you're gonna miss me if you're going to try to nitpick Joe Rudolph's recruiting at Notre Dame overall. I don't agree with this decision. Overall, done a great job at this. That's fine. That's totally fine. It's more so like I said, for the most part, I love it when I say for the most part, and then everybody wants to jump in the chat like, well, what about this one guy that doesn't recruit? That's why I said for the most part. And I also think coordinators are more important. Position coach is the important thing. Mike Mickens is a great recruiter. So far, Aaron Henry has been a strong recruiter. Al Washington did a very strong job the last couple of years recruiting the D-line. Charlie Partridge has picked up and said, oh, yeah, I got something for you. Max Bulla, when he cared, I think, was a good recruiter at linebacker. And, we'll see what Brian Jean-Marie is able to do. I actually think the job he's done to build the board the way that he has is impressive, and he walked into nothing. So not every coach is a great recruiter. Mike Brown's not a great recruiter. Good recruiter so far, but not great. But you have Mike Denbrock, who can then jump in and get involved. He's hired people off, in the recruiting office that are strong recruiters. So I think overall, there's a lot of good individual recruiters in the program because of Marcus Freeman, and A, who he's hired, and B, Trev, you and I know this, and it doesn't matter what field you're in. I'm sure it was like this for sales. There were guys who worked as hard as basically their bosses would force them to work. And if the bosses weren't on them all the time, they were going to work just hard enough to do the job and get by and, punch the clock at 5 o'clock, right, to get out of there. But if a boss came in or a manager and demanded more, they were then going to do more because that's what was expected of them. And the boss was there. If you have a boss that says, you need you to be here all day, getting the job done, and he leaves at noon for lunch and never comes back, guess what you're not going to do? You're not going to be grinding those hours he's not in the office. The fact that you have a head coach that, A, hires good recruiters, but then, B, is a dominant recruiter himself, it's like, well, if the boss is doing it, I got to do it. I think all of those things factor into why Marcus Freeman is a big reason why recruiting is as successful as you did. I don't know that any coach can do what he does. It does take a unique coach to be a successful recruiting head coach at Notre Dame. I think Charlie Weiss, as an individual recruiter, was outstanding. Now, the problem with Charlie was, A, he would turn some people off. Not everybody liked his personality. Kids who choose other schools still like Marcus Freeman. But the problem for Charlie is he didn't surround himself with enough strong people as coaches or recruiters. And that's ultimately one of the many reasons he failed. Marcus Freeman, I believe, understands, and then I think this goes back to his Ohio State days. He understands the head coach has to set the standard, but he's got to surround himself with top-notch people. And for the most part, he's not perfect, but for the most part, he's done a really good job of that at Notre Dame.
Without a doubt. No, I agree completely. The other facet of this conversation, Brian, is their on field success. You can be a dynamic recruiter individually and you can hire a great recruiting staff. But at the end of the day, kids want to go play for a program that has a proven track record of having success. And we're talking about a program here at Notre Dame. The last 2 years, they've been 24-4. In 2024, they made a playoff run. They ended their 30-year major bowl win drought. And then just to add the icing on the cake, they won another one a week later, played for a national title game. And I would argue they were significantly more competitive in that game than what they were in other major times. They were in the playoffs in previous years, like 2018 or 2020 or 2012 when they played for the national championship against Alabama. But even outside of that, we're talking about a coach that's had 3 straight years of at least 10 win seasons. Went 10-3 in 2023, 14-2 in 2024, and then 10-2 this past season. And ended the season. He's ended back-to-back regular seasons. Notre Dame has ended back-to-back regular seasons on 10-game win streaks each year, which is something that is very, very difficult to do. You have to have a good track record of on-field success to back up what you're doing on the recruiting trail.
Look, Trev, you can't discount the impact that the 2024 season had on current recruiting. Because even last year, they didn't make the playoff, but over the last 2 years, Notre Dame is 24-4. And has how many wins over, top teams? We've seen them beat Georgia. We saw them they're the last team to beat Indiana. There's only 2 teams that have beat Indiana since Curt Cignetti arrived. That's it. He is 27-2 the last 2 years. His losses, Ohio State and Notre Dame. And the Notre Dame win was more convincing than the Ohio State win was. Ohio State had some breaks that kind of went their way that, they dominated Wisconsin, but the margin, Indiana, but the margin of victory was due to turnovers. The game, Notre Dame's was more, we're going to just move the ball on you and things like that. They both convincingly beat Indiana. And so one of those teams won a title and the other one is Notre Dame. Beat Georgia convincingly in the Sugar Bowl, beat Penn State and James Franklin. So, you look at what they've been able to do the last couple of years and say, look, the on-field success is a factor. There's no question. And it's not just that they've won 24 games the last 2 years. The other part of it is in the last 2 years, in their 24 wins, let's see here, 1, 2. 2 of their 24 wins were by single digits. 2 of them. Louisville and Penn State. That's it. All 22 of their other wins were by 10 points or more. So it's not just that they're winning, but it's that they're winning and they're dominant in how they look. When kids watch TV, they see dominance. They see a defense that's lighting people up. They see an offense that's exciting to watch, with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Malachi Fields and Riley Leonard 2 years ago, CJ Carr last year. It's a fun offense to watch. And we had a conversation yesterday about, is the Notre Dame defense underrated? And you and I's takeaway was, no, I think it's the offense that's underrated. I think that's the side of the ball that's not getting enough credit for how good it's been the last couple of years, especially this past year with CJ Carr and Jeremiah Love at the helm. So, I look at it, Trev, and I think that's a big reason why they're having success, because it's one thing for Marcus Freeman to be a guy you like, but if the guy can't coach and they're not winning football games, and Notre Dame's going to finish second and third a lot, which is exactly what happened under Brian Kelly. They finished second, third, and fourth a lot, but didn't win a lot of those battles. The on-field success shows, hey, look, guys, we were able to get to the playoffs and win 3 games. Last year, a lot of people think that Notre Dame got screwed. The casuals and the odd fans of certain teams that just can't have a rational conversation, they're going to be upset that Notre Dame, is crying about being left out. But a lot of the people see it and say, hey, man, they did get screwed. There's a lot of people that will, in a moment of honesty, say, yeah, that team might have been a problem in the playoffs if they'd have got in. They saw it. Well, more importantly, the recruits see it. The recruits see Notre Dame going out there and just killing people every week. And they're like, that's an offense I could play. If you're a quarterback, how would you not want to play that run this offense? Well, I'm going to have a great offensive line, great skill talent, great running backs. I'm going to throw the ball downfield a bunch. And so I think the on-field success, the record, the wins, who they've beaten, and the style in which they play has made Notre Dame a far more attractive program than under Brian Kelly, when it's like, well, why would I want to go to Notre Dame if I'm a top receiver? They're not going to throw the ball down the field. They're going to be slow and methodical. They don't really care about being a high-octane offense. What was the one period under Brian Kelly that they recruited receivers well?
When Mike
3 years when Mike Denbrock was the offensive coordinator. That's it. Because he was willing to do that, and then Kelly ran him off, and they got back to not recruiting receivers very well. So I think those things absolutely factor in, as does, Trev, Notre Dame's NFL results, not just the draft, but also there's more and more Notre Dame players that are not only making it to the NFL, but are making the NFL and they're very good players. Those things factor in a lot as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. I'm glad that you prefaced, too, that it's not just the draft picks. Notre Dame's had 19 players drafted over the last 3 years, but they're also not the only top-level program. Other programs that Notre Dame is recruiting against that have had a slew of draft picks over the last couple of seasons. Georgia's had that. Ohio State has had that.
And those teams have a lot more first-round picks than Notre Dame.
Exactly.
They're trending, but they're not on the same level as Georgia and Ohio State and teams like that when it comes to producing high-level draft picks, but they're trending in the right direction.
Yeah, without a doubt. But one of the things that Notre Dame does have is they have proven production at the next level. They have specific examples that they can point to of like, that guy was here recently. A lot of the players that are having success right now in the NFL at Notre Dame a lot of the players in the NFL that are having success that graduated from Notre Dame also played on the team while either Marcus Freeman was there as a D coordinator or as a head coach. Kyron Williams, his last year was in 2021. He is now, I think he is the only Rams running back since Steven Jackson to have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He was there in 2021 when Freeman was the D coordinator. Julian Love wasn't there when he was the D coordinator, but he is now a captain, and he's a Super Bowl champion, and he is a safety for the Seattle Seahawks. Riley Mills played under Marcus Freeman as a defensive coordinator, and when he was the head coach, he got a sack in the Super Bowl. Xavier Watts just I think he led the NFL in rookie interceptions with 5.
He
Ben
finished
Morrison,
like second or third in defensive rookie of the year voting, I believe. I'm actually going to look that up, but he was pretty close.
Yeah. I mean, Ben Morrison is starting in the NFL. Cam Hart was starting in the NFL. Joe Alt is starting in the NFL. So a lot of players that played for Marcus Freeman on one side of the ball or another, I mean, they're having proven success at that level. So now the anti-recruiting tactics of like, you go to Notre Dame, you're not going to go do anything at the next level like you can at Georgia, at Ohio State.
It used to be just offensive linemen because they'd go to the NFL and do well, so then they'd recruit well at the position. And then tight ends were the same way. Now it's, dude, there's a lot of DBs from Notre Dame that are now going to the NFL and starting wherever they're picked. There's running backs that are going to the NFL and being successful or now getting drafted high. So work to be done there, but the positives we've seen so far are one of the factors that go into it. And the more of these guys that go to the NFL and perform well, like you want to talk about a dream scenario for Notre Dame, it would be one of Love or Price wins the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year, and the other one finishes in the top like 3 or 4. Like that would be a dream scenario to see something like that, to see Cam Hart have a full healthy season and be successful, to see some of these players that have come along the last couple of years really start to step up and be productive. Malachi Fields goes to the Giants and has a good rookie year. Like those things would, Eli Raridan goes to the Patriots and has a really good rookie year. Those things would all be even more helpful. And then, of course, next year's draft class, the next couple draft classes, we expect to be a lot bigger and more, high level draft picks. So as we said, Trev, when we did our 27 mock draft or 27 draft thoughts, I've seen 8 different Notre Dame players projected to the first round next year. They will not have 8 first-round draft picks next year. That's not the point. It's just that there's a lot of guys on the roster that people view as first-round picks. It's usually been like 4 or 5. It's 8 next year. And that stuff matters. Because kids want to know, I want to go to Notre Dame. I'm going to get a good degree. Love Marcus Freeman. At the end of the day, my major, it's like, let's be honest about something. Notre Dame football players, the top ones, whatever their quote-unquote major is and academically is their minor. Their major is football. Their minor is business or whatever the case may be. Because, and the reason I say that is, what is your major in college? What do you choose a major for? It's not supposed to be, well, I really enjoy. No, it's because I chose history because I enjoy history, but I wanted to be a football coach. And if I ever did coach at the high school level, I would need to teach a subject. And if I'm going to teach a subject, I'm going to teach history. That was the reason why it was vocationally. You don't choose engineering because you like, math and diagrams. You choose engineering because you like math and diagrams, and it's going to lead to you working in that field. Well, if you're going to Notre Dame and you're a top recruit, your chosen profession, you want it to be football. And then your secondary profession will be what comes after football, and that's where your major can come into play. For football players who end up not playing professional football, that obviously is going to start a lot sooner. So, I mean, we got to be honest about that. And that they're coming to Notre Dame, for the most part, top recruits to go to the National Football League as their chosen profession. So if you don't have a track record of being able to send them there, then you're going to have a tougher time recruiting. And that's why you could hopefully see linebacker recruiting get back on track here in the next couple of years, because I think the NFL draft is going to be very friendly to Notre Dame linebackers here very soon. I mean, Marcus Freeman's already had a starting linebacking core. All of them got drafted. The 23 linebacker group, all three of them got drafted in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round. I think you're going to see that again in 2026 and 2027, or 27 NFL draft and 28 NFL draft. I think you're going to see all the starters and the backups from the 25 and 26 linebacker group get drafted. That's going to help as well, as will potentially next year's DB draft class. I hope it's not too big. I hope they save some, but it's going to have a lot of that. Like somebody just pointed out, acupuncture, said Justin Tuck's at Goldman Sachs now. Absolutely correct. But that came after his NFL career. And that's why, say the academic piece matters at Notre Dame. But your hope, if you're a top recruit, is that I won't need that until after I'm done with my playing career. Although I would argue those things, if you have the right mindset, will actually help you be successful with your money during your career. But you get the point that I'm making. It's not your profession, your vocation, till after you're done playing. So those are things you point at. Those things matter. And then, now you get into sort of a lot of the success Notre Dame has had in recruiting, or hasn't had, in a lot of ways has been tied to whether or not the administration in Notre Dame supports Notre Dame football or not.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's the off the field is just as impactful to a place like Notre Dame as is on the field, because we've seen Notre Dame teams before in the past have tons of on-field success. I'm not talking just about the Brian Kelly era. We've seen it from, the end of Lou's days. I mean, at least I haven't seen it. I've heard about it from the end of Lou's days. Charlie Weiss had a couple of years in 05 and 06 where he was very successful at Notre Dame. And look, I like poking fun at Brian Kelly. I'm not going to act like every single season he had at Notre Dame sucked. 2012 didn't suck. 2018 didn't suck. 2020 didn't suck. We talk about varying degrees of living up to the standard, but it didn't suck. There were some obstacles that they ran into that had nothing to do with the level of talent they could attract, or the Notre Dame draw not having as much of a pull as it normally does, or the on-field success. And one of the biggest turnarounds has been the administration for Notre Dame is doing really a twofold job. They're getting better with their academic support and their resources support. I mean, I think those are two very valid things to talk about when switching around the recruiting narrative at Notre Dame. I think those two things are huge.
There's no doubt, man. Look, here's the reality. When one of the reasons Lou Holtz had struggles late in his career is because the Notre Dame administration fought him. There were people in leadership that thought that Notre Dame was too football oriented. We don't want to be known as a football school, which now everybody's begging to be known as a football school because of the money that's in it. And there were people that pushed back on it. There's been leadership, whether it's presidents or ADs or boards that had people in it that just didn't think football and Notre Dame's ethics went together, which I strongly disagree with. In times when you've seen Notre Dame have success, there was an AD or school president who were supportive of the football team. Look, I'm not trying to act like Brian Kelly, like you said. I'm not going to pretend like Brian Kelly, all the success was in spite of him entirely. there was some of that, but you also have to look at the fact and say that, like, I'm not trying to throw shade at Brian Kelly, but if Brian Kelly didn't have elite support from Jack Swarbrick and to a degree Father Jenkins, then he doesn't have the success he has. I mean, Jack Swarbrick worked hard to give Brian Kelly the resources that he did have. I mean, you think about what's changed at Notre Dame since Jack Swarbrick took over. You think of what the stadium looks like now. You look at the indoor facility. You look at the new football facilities they're building. You look at the makeup of the practice fields. There's like 4 practice fields now. All of that was not even close to where it is now when Jack Swarbrick was hired. And Jack Swarbrick's not doing that out of his own pocket. He's not Elon Musk and he's got like billions and billions. He can just do all this stuff on his own. He had to go raise the money. He had to get the support from the administration. He had to, get the support from the board and all those type of different things. But Brian Kelly had great support, as does Marcus Freeman. And so the first thing that you're saying that I think is a big example for why they're having success recruiting from an administrative standpoint is what the academic folks are doing for Notre Dame. Now, one of the misconceptions that I've seen is that Notre Dame has lowered their standards for Marcus Freeman. I have looked into this, asked a lot of people about this. And to me, there's no evidence that Notre Dame has lowered their standards. What they have done, however, and we've explained this before, but for anyone that's new or maybe doesn't remember this, what Notre Dame has done, however, is they've changed their processes for athletes, which is smart. You should do that because it's a different animal than just recruiting a normal high school junior or senior. In that, if you wait till kids are seniors to, evaluate or finish their junior year to evaluate their academic record, it's a lot of times going to be too late for them to make any necessary changes to kind of get on a track. So what Notre Dame has done, and I won't name players, but there's been a couple players that Marcus Freeman landed that didn't initially have the academic profile to get in. If you say, well, the only reason that guy's here is because they lowered the standards. Nope. That's not what happened. What happened was these kids met with admissions much sooner than they used to. Now it's, sophomores and, younger players. And so what they're doing is they're saying, hey, listen, right now you're not acceptable, or you are acceptable, but you better maintain, or you're borderline and here's what you need to do, or you're not someone we're going to admit right now. But if you want to be admitted, you need to do this, this, and this, and this over the next year and have success. And so that's what they've done. So there was a young man that is a player you and I are very high on in the sophomore class who is a sophomore. They told him right now you're not admittable, but if you do A, B, C, D, E, and F, you're going to get in. And he nailed all of it. And he got in, and now he's thriving. We've talked about how Tay Johnson was that way. That is a name that has been mentioned where Tay, when he first started looking into Notre Dame, they're like, look, we can't get him into school. And Marcus Freeman didn't fight. Please take him anyway. Marcus Freeman said, just evaluate his academic record and tell him what he needs to do. First of all, tell us, are we wasting our time going after him? But then tell the young man what he needs to do to get into Notre Dame. And they told him, and Tay did it all, knocked it out of the park. It would have been a lot easier for Tay to say, screw this, I'm going to Tennessee. But he didn't. He wanted to go to Notre Dame, and he did the work, and now he's thriving. And that's the thing, is you don't need to lower their standards. You need to tell them that, A, you can do this, but you've got to work at it and you've got to earn it. And that makes it so much more rewarding for young men. Now, there's been other players. There's a pretty talented defensive lineman a couple of years ago that the school said you need to do A, B, C, and D. And as I've joked before, he did C and D, which is what his academic record was. So he ended up signing with an SEC school. He didn't care about going to Notre Dame. He didn't care about doing the work to get in. Well, those kids now, Notre Dame knew very early on this kid doesn't want to do the work, so they stopped recruiting him. So it's been great for Notre Dame in a lot of ways to have a school that says, hey, we're not going to lower our standards. We're not going to stop being Notre Dame because you want good football players. And fortunately, Marcus Freeman's not really asking for that. It's just tell us what these young men can do to get in, and then we can monitor whether they are or not doing the work. And so that's what we've seen him do. And then the other thing that we've seen from an administrative standpoint, Trevor, is the resources that they are committing to the football program is there. And if you don't get financial support from the administration, it makes it a lot harder to be successful on the football field. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who somehow is partnered with the company that's building the new football facility. And I remember he called me and he was in a meeting with all the higher ups at Notre Dame. And he didn't tell me who, but he's like, it's all the people that were responsible for whether or not this project's going to get built. And he said they had a conversation and he was listening to this conversation. And it was someone who's a decision maker at Notre Dame. And they said, basically something along the lines of, what's the justification for doing this? And what was said from the Notre Dame person was, we understand that when the football team is successful, we're all successful. When the football team does well, the entire campus does well. Looking at it from a financial standpoint, revenue drives way up. The football team is good. There's more donors that are in a better mood to give money over here. Don't know why, but that's the reality of it. So if we invest, let's say $200 million in this new indoor facility, and we're going to go raise the donor level. Say, well, they don't spend it. It's not Notre Dame money. It's raised money. It's a little bit of both. But the point is, if you're raising $200 million to build a building, that's $200 million you're not raising to spend on other projects on campus. So it is an investment. But their thought is, if this pays off, we're going to get way more money than that in return because the football team is good. I haven't heard that type of thinking from leadership at Notre Dame, not named Jack Swarbrick, in a long time. And so they understand this is why we're willing to give Marcus Freeman the money he wants to be successful. This is why we're willing to pay for this and make sure that our facilities are this. And because we understand that this money, if we spend $300 million, it's going to make us $5. If we spend $400 million, it's going to make us $7. And they understand that. And they understand that also, if we don't spend the money on football, then we're not going to make it either. And so that's another area where there's been a lot of support from the current leadership at Notre Dame, and they deserve a lot of credit because in the past, they didn't deserve credit, and we would say so. But from everything we're seeing so far, there's been very little that I've seen the last couple of years from the Notre Dame side that I'm like, boy, that's not the actions of somebody who supports a football program. I haven't seen that. And it's not just football either. I mean, it's happening in a lot of different sports. But obviously football is the big one because football is where the windfall happens for all the other sports as well. When football's good, that impacts everybody. When the football team makes $30-something million extra because they made a playoff run, that money doesn't just go to the football program. It goes everywhere. And so they understand that. Hey, it's good for us to support the football team because if they get to the playoff every year and make an extra $20, $30 million every year, guess what? That's going to be good. Think about this. What was it that Notre Dame made last year in the playoff? Wasn't it something like $25 million?
When they made the playoffs? Yeah.
Yeah. Additional revenue. So if in a 10-year span, Notre Dame makes the playoff in 7 years, let's just go in 10-year span, Notre Dame makes the playoffs 6 times. It's $150 million. That basically pays for the new indoor facility, which is about $150 million from what I'm told. And that's if that's the only extra revenue you're making. Assuming that's the only revenue extra you're making. So again, that makes sense to kind of do that. And that's not the only revenue that it generates. So I think it's important that we give credit there. And then also that same group of people that are raising money for all those things are also the people that are giving money for Notre Dame in the NIL. And you can't pretend the fact that Notre Dame has money to spend and is willing to spend it. And so far, spending it wisely is also a big reason why Notre Dame is successful recruiting. Let's not pretend that we're all high and mighty and Notre Dame's getting kids out of the kindness of their own heart. Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman have been very smart to make sure they're bringing in the right type of players, but those right type of players are also getting paid well. Like, I think Champ Mons is a great fit for Notre Dame. I think the family's a great fit for Notre Dame. But he's not coming here for a Golden Corral gift card either. We can acknowledge both of those things are true. And Notre Dame understands that. We got to make sure we're bringing in the right kind of kids. We're not just buying the best player just because he's the best player. Fit matters. But if we find the right player and he's the right fit, then let's go make sure that money's not the reason we don't get this kid. And that doesn't happen without the donor class stepping up to the plate and saying, we're going to do our part. Now you go do your part. Look, the people that spend the money at Notre Dame have done their part the last couple of years. Now it's up for the football program to do their part and to give them some bang for their buck. And all those things factor into why Notre Dame's recruiting operation has been so strong.
Brian, let's talk about some of these summer arrivals that are getting to campus here soon. Up next on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And it was funny. We were talking before the show, and we were just kind of recapping spring and talking about how the team looked impressive, and they were laying the groundwork to what we think is going to be a very impressive season. And then it hit us that the roster wasn't complete. I mean, if I've said this before, if somebody's first time watching Notre Dame ever was this spring inside of that indoor facility, I don't think they would have known that certain pieces were missing. I think it was now that doesn't mean that that current group doesn't have things to work on. Sure. But when you factor in the talent that they have coming in from the portal, in from the high school recruiting class, and getting back from injury, this already deep and very talented roster is going to get deeper and more talented going into summer workouts and then into fall camp. So we just wanted to talk about, what is it, June 8th, Ryan, when summer classes start, and that's when some of these kids are going to start getting to campus probably a couple days prior. These summer arrivals are going to be making a very big impact on the roster this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think next weekend is when the players will start arriving. Classes start on the 8th, so you'll probably see kids starting to come in on like Friday and Thursday and Friday. You'll start to see guys getting to campus. So next week is when the newcomers arrive. But when you look at it, Trevor, it is kind of fascinating to think about. Like, I think you and I said this, if you just had the players that were there in the spring, and we'll count like Aeneas Williams, but even if you don't count Drake Bowen, who he practiced late, but let's just not even count Drake Bowen. Let's be real, like anybody that didn't take a single team rep in fall camp, and you just took that team, that's a top 10 team. Yeah. That might be a top 5 team. Loaded receiving core, great offense. All the offensive linemen are there. CJ Carr, Aeneas Williams, Jonas Walton. You're a little Nolan. You're a little thin at running back, but you're still pretty talented there. Deep receiving core, talented at tight end, big time D line, and secondary was really, really good. The only guy you were missing there was Brandon Logan, and I think that's the only, and DJ from an injury standpoint. So we're just talking about guys that were injured. Even if you look at linebacker, which I would argue was the most hit by injuries of guys not practicing, your linebacking core is still of guys who practiced at some point in the spring. Jaden Osbury, Jalen Sneed, Madden Faramo, Teddy Rizak, Ko'okia, and Kahanukia, and Thomas Davis Jr. That's still a pretty darn good linebacker room. I'd still argue that's a top 10 linebacker room right there, in my opinion. So what's this talented team? And then you and I started talking about all the guys that weren't there this spring. You're like, holy crap. Like, I hate to be so crass with it, but that was kind of the reaction. Like, holy crap. There's a lot of talent missing this spring for a team that we were pretty excited about just based on what we saw this spring. And that's what we kind of thought we'd talk about. Now, since the new high school players and the one transfer who wasn't here this spring are going to arrive, it's kind of a good time to talk about that. We'll start with the transfer that wasn't here this spring. We'll then talk about the high school players who weren't here this spring. But then we're also going to talk about 2 tiers of injured players that we didn't see this spring that also will be arriving this spring or this summer. And once you start looking at it, Trev, you start realizing, like, boy, this roster is absolutely loaded.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think loaded is the absolute perfect term for this one. And look, they're going to be getting some impact players here, like you said, this upcoming weekend, which is going to be really exciting to talk about. And where we'll start, like you said, is with the transfer portal players. DJ McKinney's coming in over from Colorado, and he is considered to be the heir apparent at field corner because they slid Christian Gray inside into the slot. We got to see some different players try it out at field, but they're bringing in a guy who's a 2-year starter and for 1 year started alongside opposite of Travis Hunter on Colorado's defense. Very excited for DJ McKinney to get here.
Well, this is a really big one, Trev, because this was one of the more underrated and sort of overlooked transfer portal pickups. You and I kind of chuckled when we looked at where he was ranked in the transfer portal rankings, and you're like, yeah, I just don't think they paid attention to the Big 12 that much the last year. I mean, this is a kid that's a 3-year Big 12 starter, pretty good football player the last 2 years. and a guy that I've seen 2 different mock drafts have put him in the first round. I don't think he's a first round draft pick based on what I've seen, but I think he's a very good football player. And you think about how good the secondary was this spring without him, and then you start throwing him into the mix, and you start to think, boy, if he's as good as the Notre Dame coaching staff thinks he is, and let's be honest, they're part of the reason he's overlooked. Because, number one, they don't talk about with us a lot about, the transfers, and the people that do talk to me ask for me not to say anything. So we can't give love and praise and hype these kids up. The other thing is it leaked. So what happened was, remember, he committed and then it got out, and then they said, oh, they've rescinded that. Well, what happened there was when he committed, you have a certain window where you have to put in the kid's name into the portal that you're getting this kid. And then there's a lot of media people that have access to the portal, which they shouldn't have, but they do. And then they reported it. Well, so then they had to take him out because he wasn't supposed to get put in, because they were waiting till some other things were happening in the portal before they wanted to get that out there. And that whole thing, I think, was weird and just created some weird vibes around DJ McKinney that weren't his fault. And there just never was that buzz that I think there should have been about him when they got him, like there was when they got Thomas Harper and Brandon Joseph and some other players that were really strong. Jalen Stroman last year. But in reality, when you pop in the film, especially the 24 film, and the 25 film was good as well, but it wasn't as good at 24. That's really good film. And if he can be that player at Notre Dame this year, you're adding an impact cornerback that's 6'2", opposite of Leonard Moore. So the potential for DJ McKinney, Notre Dame's going to be fine at cornerback if he's not who we think he is. But if he is who we hope he is and think he can be, he's an impact player. And now all of a sudden you have a trio of corners in your starting lineup with Christian Gray in the nickel that's as good as anybody in the country, if not better. And now your depth is now guys like Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary and Jaden Sanders are your backups. That's a really good starting cornerback room if they're your starters. So I think DJ McKinney could be the final piece to this being a truly elite game-changing quarterback room. It's going to be really good no matter what. And you could argue it's going to be elite no matter what. But does that mean elite is in there in the top 3, or elite is in there in the number 1, or even elite, they're number 1, but they're so far ahead of everybody else at number 1 that the game has changed with that group. He could play a big role in that. And I think he's also a guy that fits what Chris Ash wants to do very well. He plays a lot of off coverage. He's a really rangy kid. He can play the post. He does a lot of the different things with quarters and cover 2 and cover 3 that Chris Ash likes to do, but he's also can line up and play man if you need him to. And that's why I think he was a really strong pickup that's just not getting as much attention as the D tackles, as the receivers. But this kid, in my opinion, if he plays his potential, will take a back seat to nobody from the transfer portal in the 2026 group.
I agree. He has the potential to take this room over the top, but I think you hit on something that's really important. He doesn't have to be. In years past, we've seen Notre Dame teams bring in portal players where it's this guy's got to work out, and the bright side for DJ McKinney is let's play out worst case scenario, because I know people love to have that conversation too. Let's say because I honestly think his worst case scenario is he comes in and he's just a solid player. I don't think that there's any world where he comes in and is terrible. I don't.
Right.
So let's play worst case scenario. He's just a solid player, and then Dallas Golden explodes as a sophomore. Oh no. Or let's say Mark Zachary gets his playing strength up, and what I mean?
Or Jaden Sanders or Kari Adams is just too good not to play right. There's a lot of scenarios where your point could be valid, Trev. But whichever one you take, let's just say that's true. He's just solid.
Let's just say he's just solid. Notre Dame is in a spot now where they don't need individual portal guys. And I would argue that for every single portal player, that they're not in a spot where this guy has to work out or that individual spot is in trouble. But I'm with you, man. I think DJ McKinney's going to take this secondary over the top. I said yesterday, watching his 24 film, he reminds me a lot of what Cam Hart was to the field in that 2023 Notre Dame defense. I think that's kind of the role that DJ McKinney played in that 24 Colorado defense. Makes me feel a heck of a lot more confident in FanDuel's over-under win total for Notre Dame being at 11.5 over-under. If DJ McKinney's able to work out the way that we think that he can, I'll feel really good in that. But he's not the only player that Notre Dame is getting in this summer. They have a handful of high school players coming in, Brian, and I know it starts off with one guy that you and I were both very, very excited to see. That's tight end Ian Premer.
Oh, there's no doubt, man. You look at this impact, this freshman class, it's smaller, but there's some talented dudes here. And Ian Premer obviously comes in, and he was your top offensive recruit, arguably your best overall recruit in the class. I think it's very arguable. And it's arguable not because he's not good. It's arguable because they had a lot of really good players. It's like, okay, is it him? Is it Rodney Dunham? Is it Joey O'Brien? Is it Kari Adams? Is it Grayson McHugh? You know, like there's a lot of guys in that conversation for who could be the best player in the class. And it's more about how good the class was. Ian Premer's a guy that I had as a 5-star grade. I mean, this is a 6'6", 230-pound tight end that was playing running back at times, was returning punts, plays deep safety, is a kick returner. I mean, have you ever seen a 6'6" tight end? And I don't care what level of high school he's playing at, that had a punt return for a touchdown, a kick return for a touchdown, a handoff out of the backfield for a touchdown, and also caught passes for touchdowns. I think he had a pick 6 as well, but I'm not as confident in that one. Like, that doesn't happen a whole lot. He's a special kid. And he brings a pass-catching skill set from a body type that they don't have on the roster right now. Preston Frizzell can be a very good pass catcher someday, but he's 6'4", 220. Jack Larson has a chance to be a very good pass catcher someday, but he's 6'3", 250, and he's not an elite athlete. This is a kid who has the body of Cooper Flanagan and James Flanagan, but has the athleticism and pass-catching skills of Preston Frizzell or of a Tyler Eifert, or pick any other big-time pass-catching tight end. He's got that kind of potential. Now, he had an off-season injury to his foot. When we saw him in the spring, he had a walking boot on, so I'm not quite sure where he is in that regard. I would imagine he'll be fine, but getting him on campus this summer and getting him up to speed as quickly as possible is going to be important, because I think this is, number one, this is not a 5-year player. I don't care if they have the rule that, 5 years to play 5. That doesn't matter for some kids. That's not going to matter it was never going to matter for Jeremiah Love. It was never going to matter for Will Fuller. It was never going to matter for Quentin Nelson. It was never going to matter for Joe Alt. And it's never going to matter for Ian Premer unless there's just bad injuries. Getting him on campus this summer is going to add something to the mix when it comes to the tight end battle. Now, I'm not someone who's just thrusting him into the 2 deep. He's going to have to earn it, because there's some really good players at this tight end room. Cooper Flanagan, James Flanagan, Ty Washington showed some growth this spring. Jack Larson showed growth this spring. Preston Frizzell's got some ability. Like, this is a room that's got good football players. It's just that, like, my dream scenario is a world in which you're seeing both of the Flanagans and Ian Premer getting action this year. And someday down the road where it's James Flanagan and Ian Premer. It's not like, well, now that Premer's here, screw James Flanagan, don't care about him anymore. No, I want to see them both be dominant, because they're very different players, and I love that compliment that they bring to each other. So it's hard not to get excited about him, Trev. And then, of course, when you talk about the backup quarterback battle, there's a very talented player showing up this summer who's going to have his own say, and who's the heir apparent to CJ Carr.
And without a doubt, Teddy Gerard shows up here, reclassified from the 27 class to the 26 class, and he's been a real big hot topic of conversation. Now, we can dive into the debate around, is he going to be the heir apparent to CJ Carr, or does he walk in on day one and take over the backup quarterback job? I think Brian and I have made our thoughts pretty clear on where we believe Teddy Gerard stands, but make no mistake about it, they're getting a talented kid in this summer in the quarterback room. I mean, this is probably from top to bottom one of the most talented quarterback rooms I've seen at Notre Dame in quite some time. With CJ Carr up top, you got Blake Hebert, Noah Grubbs, Teddy Gerard, and then, oh, by the way, and then next couple seasons you're also going to be getting Champ Mons in. So this is
I think is even who I've said I've gone on record as saying is the most talented quarterback to pick Notre Dame since CJ Carr.
Yeah,
for the record, which is saying something, because as you said, Teddy Gerard's a very talented quarterback as well.
Yes, he adds a lot of depth, but Notre Dame is not in a spot where they need him to be the number one quarterback this offseason, or the number two quarterback this offseason. I mean, Noah Grubbs, to me, showed enough this offseason. Blake Hebert showed enough to me this spring so far that they'll be in good hands regardless of what they choose. But Teddy Gerard will have the opportunity to go out and stake his claim. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what all comes to fruition. But I'm also excited to see what he does in this offense as well. I think that'll be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talked about this the other day, and I think it applies to Teddy Gerard very well. I don't really have a lot of expectations for Teddy Gerard to come in and seize hold of the backup quarterback job right away. He's either way more advanced than I think he is, and this is a high school kid who's never thrown for 3,000 yards, by the way, or it's bad news for the guys in front of him. But as you and I have said, I don't care about him being the number 2 quarterback this year. CJ Carr was never the number 2 quarterback in 2024. Never. It was Steve Angeli all year. Now, there was some conversation that if Riley went down for long term with how CJ was progressing, there was talk that maybe CJ becomes the long-term answer. But he still wasn't the backup quarterback. And that's true for Teddy Gerard as well. He doesn't need to be the backup quarterback this year. This is about him growing, getting comfortable, building up his body. You and I saw him, for the spring. He's a skinny kid still. He needs a lot of time in the weight room. He's going to need a lot of time mechanically to fix some things, to learn the offense. This is not an easy offense to learn. And he hasn't played as much football as Noah Grubbs has played because he's skipping a whole year of high school football. And you see how much Noah Grubbs developed as a senior and what he was able to do as a senior. So this is a year of learning for Teddy Gerard, building up his body and learning and enhancing his game so that next spring he has a shot to be that guy. If he wins the number 2 job early on, it would be, well, why? That would have me optimistic or pessimistic about the backup quarterback situation. If it's just he's that good, great. That's awesome. But I'm simply saying this because it's kind of like the Bryce Young situation. I don't want people to start thinking he is this right away when in reality that shouldn't be the expectation. He needs to be that next spring, not right now. Right now it's about development and growth, and then let's see where he's at come, next March is when we start to see that. But if it happens sooner than we think and it's for good reasons, then that's great. But I'm looking forward to seeing this quarterback room in fall camp, Trev, when you do have the 3 kids we saw in the spring, plus you throw a kid like Teddy Gerard in there. Like you said, this is a very talented quarterback room. It's young, and there's not a lot of experience after CJ Carr, but just God-given physical tools, there's a lot to work with here in this room.
Without a doubt. Another player that they have coming in the summer is technically a guy who's already on campus, but he was playing lacrosse. Just got done playing in the lacrosse national championship, and that's Dylan Faison, the younger brother of Jordan. He did. Was that his first goal in the playoffs?
I thought he scored in the first round too, but I'm not 100% sure. He's been playing a bunch for them, but I thought he had was it Jacksonville they beat in the first round?
Yes. Yeah. But
I thought he scored that game as well.
Regardless, Notre Dame has another talented wide receiver coming in, a member of the 2026 class. Dylan Faison's been on campus with the lacrosse team. Now he's making the transition over to football, and he's going to link arms with his brother in the wide receiver room, which I think is a really cool storyline.
Yeah, that'll be fun to see watching Jordan and Dylan. And they're very different kind of builds. They look similar, but they're very different builds. Jordan is shorter and squattier, and Dylan's kind of tall and skinny. He's 6'1" plus and very smooth athlete. He's more smooth, where Jordan is more sudden.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see those two play, and I'm curious to kind of see where his strength is this summer after being with the lacrosse program, which is going to help you build some of that toughness you need for football, obviously. But it's a different type of strength and conditioning program. How quickly does he take to that? And then, of course, you've got a couple offensive linemen showing up this spring or this summer too, Trev. Ben Nichols and Gregory Patrick showing up are obviously going to add depth, but Ben Nichols makes this offensive line a whole lot bigger. Yeah. He's a massive young man. Gregory Patrick. The question I have about Gregory Patrick is going to be, where are they going to play him?
Yeah.
Because for a while there was talk with some of my sources that he would be the center from this class. Well, they ended up moving Sullivan Garvin there. Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Do they try him at tackle, see how he does at tackle, and then move him inside? When you sign 6 guys, you're going to have 3 guys somewhere or 2 guys at center. I'm very curious to see where Gregory Patrick starts, because then that allows, he can always move, but I am very curious to see where he starts. Ben Nichols, I think the question is, does he go to left guard or right guard? I think that's the question there. With Gregory Patrick, it's like, do they start him at tackle? If so, is it left? Is it right? Is it guard? Is it center? Those, because I would consider moving him to center, because if he's really a natural center, then you can cross-train Sullivan Garvin to be a center and a guard, because Sullivan could easily move to guard and be every bit as good as he was a center. So I'm very fascinated to see what they do with Gregory Patrick. And then finally, a player that shows up this summer is the kicking room is getting another talented player. Yeah. And Micah Drescher, who shows up this summer. He was a very late addition to the class. He signed, I think, after signing day, right? Didn't he? Or he signed in February. He signed after the December signing day. They flipped him from Michigan. Big leg, very big leg. He's another just talented place kicker that they have in the room. It's amazing. You talk about the quarterback room. This is the most talented depth we've seen at kicker. It's always been like one good kicker, like veteran, and then like his heir apparent, and then a bunch of walk-ons. And some of those walk-ons were good kickers, but like now it's like you've got Spencer Porath, you've got Eric Schmidt, and you've got now Micah Drescher. You're like, dude, there's some strong legs. Plus you have Eric Schmidt can do both. He can do all three things. And you now have Jasper Scaife, which we saw in the spring, Trev. He's learning to punt, but when he gets a hold of them,
dude,
it doesn't look a lot different than what James Rondell does.
When Jasper Scaife gets a hold of it, he absolutely booms it. Now, the question is what type of step does he take in the offseason? Because in the spring, it was kind of few far between, but when he would get a hold of it, that thing went. I'm with you completely. Yeah. Micah Drescher adds a lot of talent to that room. But, Brian, I'm excited to see DJ McKinney. I'm excited to see what these high school recruits start doing. But where a lot of my excitement lies and where a lot of my eagerness to see this team in fall camp lies for me is the players that they're getting back from injury.
Yeah, the return to health.
Yes, because that's I think when we start to see, especially with these tier 1 guys, this team truly start to take shape. Yeah. With Ashton Craig coming back at center, it will be our first time getting to see from left to right Will Black, Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, Sullivan Absher, and Gerby Lambert. Very excited for that.
Now, one guy that we won't talk about in this conversation is Charles Jagasaw, because we don't think he's going to be back this summer. These are more guys that we think are going to be back at some point in time this summer to some degree. And when you talk about it, it's the three guys at the top. It's Ashton Craig on offense, it's Kedron Young on offense, and then it's Keegan Saviliamas on defense. Now, I don't really count Jason Onye because we're talking about guys that just didn't do anything this spring. Jason was there for a while. He's fine. But when you talk about adding Ashton Craig to that offensive line, which we thought looked pretty good this spring, you just still, man, I hope the kid can stay healthy, because like you nailed it. When he's healthy, he's been one of the best centers in college football. He's a top 10 center when he's healthy, and that's been true going back to his first year in 2024, where he'd kind of taken over as starter. With him, there's a lot of questions. We can say generally, boy, if he's healthy, insert comment, but is he going to be the same player after 2 knee injuries? Is he going to look like he did before the second knee injury? I don't know the answer to that. And we'll start to get some of those answers this spring, because this is one of the few times where the summer matters to me for an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Because normally I don't care. Like, I don't care what Ashton Craig does with pads on. I know what he can do with pads on. I want to see that he's still the same athlete that he was before the injury. So this is the first time I've ever been like really curious to see how an offensive lineman does in summer drills with no pads on. Usually it's like, I don't care. Like, okay, he needs to lose weight, gain weight, whatever, but like, I don't care. We know he can move, and you always like seeing a guy work out, but this is the one where I'm genuinely like fascinated to hear what the feedback is from what Ashton Craig does once he finally gets fully cleared. And I don't know if that's going to be the first week of workouts or later in the summer. I don't know when that's going to happen, but when that final, check gets made or he's full go, I'm very fascinated to hear about what his strength numbers look like, and more importantly, what his agility looks like, because that's the thing about Ashton Craig is he's a very good athlete. On top of being a strong Indiana country boy, he's a very good athlete.
Yeah.
And, he works at the second level as well as any center Notre Dame has had in the last 20 years, along with like Jarrett Patterson. Thinking of some guys that were pretty, Nick Martin was pretty good about that. Like he really works well to the second level. And I'm excited to see what he can do if he can stay healthy. But first and foremost, before that, it's like, is he the same athlete that he was before?
Yeah. 100%. My 2 questions with Ashton Craig are twofold. One, where is he at initially? Same questions that you have. And then the next question that I will have for Ashton Craig is probably after Halloween.
Yeah.
Of like, and it sounds
when we
crazy
get to November,
to say,
and he's still on the roster, and he's
yeah, like it's, and then it's okay. Like The next legitimate question I have for him is like, what is your stamina going to be like to play a 15 to 16 games? I mean, he's going to almost, if he plays 15 games this year, he will triple the amount of games that he's played in a season in 1 year.
Yep.
I mean, you know what I mean? He started 5 games in 2025. He started 3 before he got hurt in 2024. He's going to go from playing those games to 15, 16 games. So be very interested to see where he is. And then with Kedron Young, kind of the similar storylines. I did kind of simple for him. Get healthy, stay healthy, but I'll be very interested to see where he starts out too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kedron is an interesting player, Trev, because he's another one that you look at and say, is he the same athlete that he was before? If he is, okay, let's roll. Another talented back. I mean, it's really, for him, it's that simple. We know he can play. I mean, you saw what he did last spring. He was pushing Aeneas Williams for that, who's going to be the number 3 back. Who is the number 1 guy should the starter go down? You know, or who's going to be 1B with 1A if Jadarian or Jeremiah goes down? But we can't just assume that he's going to, a 230, 240-pound back is going to come back from that knee injury and just be full go. Same explosiveness, same cutting ability, same agility. I don't know the answers to that. If he is, then good night. That's why I said, was it a couple weeks ago, I said his return to health could have a bigger impact. He's a bigger wild card than maybe anybody on the roster. His breakout could be a bigger wild card than anybody on the roster having a breakout. You could argue that.
Yeah.
Because of the unique skill set that he brings to the table. You know, like, and here's what I mean by that. If Mylan Graham has a breakout, that's a huge impact. But there are other guys that could have a similar impact that have a similar skill set. It could be Elijah Burris, it could be Cam Williams, it could be Jaden Greathouse staying healthy, it could be Micah Gilbert. I mean, there's Micah Gilbert's probably not a great example. Logan Soldate, Caden Finley, Bubba Frazier. There's a lot of guys that could be similar to those things. If Jonas Walton breaking out is great, but Javian Osborne's a very similar player. They do similar things. So you look at those positions and you're like, well, James Flanagan is a breakout. Great. That means he's a more talented version of Cooper Flanagan. You know, I mean, they're comparable players. What makes Kedron unique is there's nobody else like him on the roster at running back. Like, he's a unicorn on this roster at running back. And you say, well, what do you mean? He's a faster and a much faster Audric Estime, in my opinion, is who he is. You add that to the mix of what we saw this spring. Yeah, let's have some fun. But 100%. We just need to see that he's healthy. And same thing with Kingston Villamasa. We had a question the other day, who are you looking forward to seeing in the fall? I'm not looking forward to seeing Kingston Villamasa in the fall. Like, in that, what kind of player is he going to be? We know he's a stud. It's just, is he going to be healthy? And when's he going to be healthy? But you're going to get him back at some point in time this summer into fall camp, and it's going to be very exciting to see, because we said this linebacker core is pretty flipping good before, and you could really add Drake Bowen to this mix based on what we saw from spring practice. But the reason I don't include Drake is because we did see Drake for the last half of the spring going through drills, and he was running fine. He was fine. You know, now it's like Kingston we didn't see outside of street clothes, and I'm very much curious to see him. Then there's another tier, Trev, and these are sort of the transfers and the freshmen that are going to be new to the team. And one guy that I'm curious to see when he comes back and what he looks like is Quincy Porter. He's a very intriguing player that we will see for the first time, either most likely at points this summer, but we will see him first time this fall, but his teammates will see him for the first time this summer.
Quincy Porter to the wide receiver room is what Kedron Young is to the running back room, in my opinion. I mean, he's the only guy on the roster that has that 6'4", 210-pound boundary receiver frame. Whereas, you brought up Mylan Graham, and there's insert this guy here to have a similar skill set to what Mylan brings to the table. I don't know if they have that quite yet in what they have with Quincy Porter. Micah Gilbert, potentially. I think Devin Fitzgerald might be a little ways away from being able to fill that void. But even so, those are 2 6'2" guys. So I'm very interested to see what type of push they get from Quincy Porter in the boundary. Because I will say this, there are some people that I think just assume that the second he straps on the pads, he's Notre Dame's number 1 boundary receiver. He is also going to have to go out and earn that job. In the same way that there's people that assume that if Kedron Young is 100% healthy and ready to go, he's just the number 1 running back. And I think he will be one of And so I think that's how I feel about Quincy Porter. Very intrigued to see what he does this offseason, but I'm with you. I'm very much looking forward to it because up to this point, I've just kind of seen him in pictures standing next to the other wide receivers if they're at like a workout you can just look at it and be like, okay, one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a different cat. You could argue he is the other player you could say belongs in that conversation that I said about Kedron Young. The reason I don't put him in there is because I think that Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams can bring similar things to the table, just not in the same body type, the same actual full size. But you could make a case, Trev, that he belongs in that conversation too, where him breaking out just gives you something you don't really have proven on the current roster. So it'll be interesting to see him. And then, look, Javian Osborne returns from an injury at some point in time this summer. I'm fascinated to see how he looks. He was a dynamic back. He graded out as a top 75 national player to me. Kid had over 6,500 career rushing yards and over 100 career rushing touchdowns in 6A Texas. Big-time player. Braden Robinson should be back at some point in time this summer as well. Smaller guy, but dynamic. With Javion, I'm not worried about what's his athleticism like. He had a hand injury. And it's just more, can he keep that hand healthy? With Braden Robinson, obviously, I want to see what he looks like athletically because he had a knee injury. Another guy that I'm excited to see return this summer, Trev, because I'm very curious to see what kind of impact he can make as a freshman is Kari Adams, who was, I think, my number 2 ranked player in the defensive class behind Joey O'Brien. Maybe, I think he was number 2. I'm going to look that up because I always get like him and Rodney. It was always very close with him and Rodney as who was that next guy after Joey O'Brien. But this is another guy that I graded out as a top 50. He was a 4.5 star, which right now ranges in top 75. I expanded a little bit, but he graded out as a top 35 player. He was very close to earning a 5-star grade for me, Trev. Very, very close. But he's a 6'2" corner, tall. He was my number 2 behind Joey O'Brien and ahead of Rodney Dunham. A very dynamic player, a very special talent. He had a shoulder injury. How's he going to be? Is it something that's going to linger his entire career? Or is it, like Cam Hart did, a little bit like Christian Gray had? Or is it just kind of a thing that you see, and now we've got to, see how that goes. But man, if he comes back to full strength, you just added a 6'1.5", almost 6'2", fast, long, dynamic athlete at cornerback to a room that was already pretty loaded in the spring.
Yeah, without a doubt, for all of the talk around how deep the secondary is, I mean, we've talked about what the rotation at nickel could be, what the rotation at field could be, what the safety rotation could be. We haven't really talked a lot about what's behind Leonard Moore in the boundary. We saw Jaden Sanders do it in the blue gold game. It took him a little bit of while to build up some steam. I thought he finished the blue gold game in strong fashion, but outside of that, we didn't see a whole lot of other players take reps at boundary. So Kari Adams could very quickly come in, and his elevation at boundary corner could free up Jaden Sanders to only focus on nickel and field. And so I'll be very curious to see what happens with him. And also curious to see what happens if Tiki Hola is able to come back as well. He's another talented defensive lineman in this class that, he adds more depth. He adds size for sure on that interior defensive line. But I know it's with him, it's a little bit of a question mark of like when he's going to come back, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah. With Tiki, it's going to be because he injured his knee late in his senior season. So there is some thought that he may not get back to like full go until the fall. But I do think you're going to start seeing him ramp things up a little bit this summer, which is going to be good. That's kind of where I'm at with Braden Robinson too. It's like, I'm not quite sure when he's going to get back to being in those workouts, but we're going to start to see this is the period where he starts to get more. Cause I think he got hurt in November. And now you're getting that 6 to 8 month range. He's now 6 to 7 months in now. I think 6 months in now. So now it's the beginning of that window where guys tend to come back and get back on the field from an ACL, as long as it's clean. Because that's what they say now. It's a 6 to 8 month recovery. And that 6 to 8 months doesn't mean you're literally doing nothing until 6 months. That's just when you get to that point when you're getting back to full strength and full health and those type of things. But Yeah, that's going to be seeing him get back and just add more beef to that middle. Same with Jacoby Clapper. It's one thing we saw from him the one day we saw him in drills. That kid's athletic.
Athletic
He
and
can move.
significantly bigger
He
than
can
I
move.
thought that he was going to be.
So
that's for sure.
Wrapping this all up, Trev, you think about how good the roster was in the spring. And the roster did not include Kingston Viliama-Asa, Kedron Young, Ashton Craig, Quincy Porter, Javian Osborne, Kari Adams, DJ McKinney, Ian Premer, Teddy Gerard, Ben Nichols. I mean, that's a long, and I didn't even read everybody. That's a long list of guys that you're adding to what we already thought was a talented roster just on what we saw this spring. It starts getting a little bit excited. But those guys are going to be showing up to campus the end of next week, along with the rest of the team as they get ready for summer school and summer workouts. And so I'm very, very much looking forward to, hearing what those guys look like.
Brian, we have a real fun conversation up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And we wanted to come up with some different offseason topics. And one thing that we talked about was kind of like, a look back at like Notre Dame history. We get a lot of questions about, our favorite team with this, or could you imagine combining this team with this team? And it got us thinking, what are the top 5 Notre Dame teams of the last 25 years?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll kick it to you here because I know that there's a certain criteria that we use to measure, and rank these teams. But first and foremost, this is just going to be a really fun conversation that I'm looking forward to diving into.
Yeah, we want to do a lot more of this over the summer, and we haven't done a whole lot of like Notre Dame history stuff, and there's just certain things we won't be able to get to because it is like I'm going to break down who's the greatest defensive ends of all time because I never saw Ross Browner play. But it'd be fun to do some of these things like best offensive, best. We're going to do one soon of the best players of the 2000 on offense, best on defense, and really have some fun with it. But this one was an interesting one because we've been asked this before about who's the best teams and all these other type of things. But this one's an interesting one because I think there's a lot of room for debate on just who belongs in this conversation, Trev, of the best teams, because the first 3 are obvious, but then it's like, okay, but what order do you put the best 3 in? And then there's some debate between like 4 and 5 of teams that belong in there. And so what we did is we kind of looked at every team from 2000 to 2025. And then one thing we'll do at the end of the season is we'll talk about where we think the range is going to be for the 26 team to fit into that, adding that into the conversation, Travis. Where do we expect the 26 team to fit in on the high end, which is obvious? And then what's the floor for what we think this team will be this year and how it will stack up against these teams? So that's going to make for a fun conversation at the end as well. But so here's what our criteria was, because we're like, well, it's just not just record, but it's results is part of it. What they did in the postseason factors in to a degree. What they did against top 25 teams, we use the record of teams that were, when we give records, it's record of games against teams that were ranked at the time. But we do factor in how good was that win actually, and then were there any good wins that a team had that didn't look like it at the time but turned out to be great wins. For example, I'm going to give 2017 Notre Dame more credit for beating an unranked Michigan State team by 20 on the road than I'm going to give the 05 team for beating number 3 Michigan on the road in early in the season, because what we found out is that Michigan team ended up 7-6. They weren't very good. Whereas that Michigan State team ended up 10-3 and ranked in the top 15. So we look at both of those in this conversation. And so that's part of it. Talent is a big part of it. Like how talented and how good were these teams? Dominance plays a role. Like if you're talking about separating 2 good teams with the same record, well, what are some separators? Who they beat, how many ranked teams they beat, how did in the postseason, but then also just how did they win? Were they just kind of getting by the skin of their teeth every week, or were they just out there punishing people? And then the last factor is honestly, it's just kind of fun. Was this an entertaining team to watch? And so that's kind of I don't know that actually swayed us in any other direction. But that was sort of that, if we need a final tiebreaker, that one's in there. So let's dive into this, Trev, and let's go 5-1 and we'll give our 5 best Notre Dame teams, and then we'll give our reasoning for why we had those teams ranked where we had them. Let's go with number 5, Trev, and that's the 2005 Notre Dame football team.
Yeah, this was kind of the beginning of the revival of Notre Dame football. Obviously, it was short-lived because we know what happened from 07 to 09. But, for the longest time, Notre Dame was considered a lukewarm program. I remember watching College Game Day before Notre Dame played Pitt on the road, and they were talking about, through Notre Dame's first 6 games in 05, what did people think they were going to go? And I remember there was people talking about, they could be 1-5 or possibly 0-6 through the first 6 games. And Kirk Herbstreit was actually the guy that was like, I think they go 4-2. And that's actually what they ended up being, through their game with USC. Did not foresee the loss to Michigan State on there. That was one of the reasons why we had them at number 5 overall, because one of the things that they had that a lot of the other teams in our rankings didn't have, shockingly outside of our number 1 team, was a head-scratching loss to a team where it's like, how did you lose to that team? But when you look at what they did this in 2005, it was phenomenal. I mean, it was Brady Quinn's, entrance onto the national stage, 3,900 passing yards, 32 touchdowns. Darius Walker was an 1,100-yard rusher. He had 2 1,000-yard receivers in Jeff Samardzija and Mo Stovall. And I would have been very interested to have seen what Raymond McKnight could have done if he unfortunately didn't get hurt early on in that season too. And
Rayshawn Powers, Neal.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a big one. A buddy of mine has said if Chris Fromm doesn't get injured against USC, he thinks they win that game because he would have been able to get some pressure at the end of that game where Ronald Talley was not able to do so on some of those late throws that, who knows if that would have been the case. But yeah, there were some injuries that you look back and say, man, what would that team have been like if this guy doesn't get injured? That's a very interesting conversation, Trevor.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt, man.
When I look at the 2005 team, here's some things I liked about this team. Number 1 is they were, for the most part, a pretty dominant team. When you look at sort of what their resume is, Trev, this is a team that obviously finished 9-3. I remember there were some people that were like they could start the season with X number of losses in a row. There were people that thought that Notre Dame had a chance to, kind of go on a bit of a losing streak to start the season because they played several ranked teams to start the season. You had Pitt was ranked, you had Michigan was ranked, and there was Michigan State at Washington, Purdue was ranked, USC was ranked. Wasn't there one person that said at one point in time they might start 0-8? It wasn't Kirk Herbstreit. Who was that? Was that Lee Corso?
Lee Corso said they could start 0-6.
Yeah. And you're like, okay, that's going to be interesting. And then, of course, they come out that first game and just beat the doors off of Pitt on the road. And, so, I mean, they won their games by 21, 19, 21, 26, 20, 21, 24. And then they had 2 7-point wins, one at Michigan, one at Stanford in the regular season. Their 2 losses were a combined 6 points. So, I mean, they were a pretty dominant team. They were a fun team to watch. And look, they lost to the 2 best teams they played at the end of the year. But they also had 3 games that they won against teams that were ranked at the time. And that it was a very entertaining team to watch, a dominant team in a lot of ways, but one that you always look back and say, what if? What if you don't let Michigan State jump out to that early lead? What if you can, Darius Walker doesn't go out of bounds on that last touchdown drive? What if, there's always those what ifs in that game, and you always look back with the what ifs, but that team was a lot closer to being 11-1 or 12-0 or 11-0 in the regular season than they were to being worse than 9-3. Because when they won for the most part convincingly that season. And final piece, they were talented and fun team to watch.
Dude, they were so fun. That team probably out of any of the other teams on my list have my all-time favorite pass catching unit.
Yeah.
Out of any of them. I mean, Samardzija, Stovall, Rama, Matt Shelton, Anthony Fasano, John Carlson. I mean, that was.
And Darius Walker caught a ton of passes out of the backfield as well. Yes.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's probably one of my all-time favorite pass catching units at Notre Dame. Yeah. I mean, that was
Samardzija and Stovall, and a lot of times were just a cheat code that year.
Yeah.
And I loved Rama, but the Samardzija-Rama duo was not as dominant as the Samardzija Stovall duo because they were just so big. I mean, even against Ohio State, Brady Quinn threw for a bunch of yards in that game. Threw for almost 300 yards that game. I mean, first drive of the game, they went right down the field on Ohio State. They got beat in the trenches in that game. That's offensively. That's really what hurt them. But I mean, Mo and Samardzija, especially Mo had a great game against Ohio State, I thought.
Mo.
Yeah, he was a dude. That was a fun duo to watch. And it's just a fun team to watch. Number 4, Trev, is the 2017 team. This is a team that you and I were talking about this up until through the Wake Forest game right before Miami. This is a top 2 team in our opinion. Like, this was a dominant team that finished poorly. When you look at the 2017 team, 10-3, so they were 1 game better than the 2005 team. They did win their bowl game. They finished 3-3 against ranked teams. I think overall had a tougher schedule. Yes, they were 3-3, but you and I have talked about that. They beat a team on the road by 20 that finished the year ranked 15th. I think they had more impressive wins than the 2005 team, as far as just better. Boy, that was a really good football team that they beat. Lots of dominant stretches that season too, Trev, where they just steamrolled people that season. If you look at their wins, they were by 32, 33, 29, 20, 35, 23, 35, 21, 11. And then the wheels came off a little bit, which dropped them down. They obviously got blown out by Miami, got beat convincingly by Stanford, beat Navy by a touchdown, and then beat LSU in a bowl game by 4. Did not finish great, which is what dropped them down to number 4. But this team, during its dominant stretches, was as good as any team that Notre Dame has had. I would argue that the Notre Dame we saw from Boston College to NC State, that's a stretch of 6 games. We have not seen a more dominant 6-game stretch since then, and that includes this year. When you just talk about not just the margin of victory, but the physical dominance with which they showed that season was, man, that was impressive. Really, really impressive.
The 2017 Notre Dame team is one that I wish I had more appreciation for in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the longest time, I talked about how this was the team that set the stigma that Notre Dame can't pass the ball, they'll beat you with tough defense, and they'll beat you running the ball.
That's right.
And at the time, I was just like, yeah, that's great, but you're not going to beat Georgia by doing that. You're not going to beat USC by doing that, which they ended up absolutely demolishing them that year in a game where Brandon Wimbush had to pass to kind of open it up a little bit. And, but now looking back on it, what they did that season was so impressive. I got so hung up on, they had a starting quarterback that completed less than 50% of his passes and threw for 16 touchdowns, while ignoring the fact that he rushed for 803 yards and 14 touchdowns, so right. That was back in a time when I didn't have the appreciation for trench play like I do now, but this team was absolutely dominant, man. I mean, it was. That's what separated them from the 05 team for me as well, is I think they were, especially once you start putting margin of defeat aside. Because when I first made my rankings, I put the 05 team above them because I was like, they had a 3-point loss and then a loss in overtime. They didn't lose by 33 points to Miami. But then once you put all factors on the table, 2017 ended up taking the day because this was a very, very, very impressive team.
It was. And that's the thing that made it to where, Trevor, I was with you. I had 05 ahead of 17. And 05 for me was a more enjoyable season for a lot of reasons. It was a more enjoyable season because it was year 1 of Charlie Weiss. There was optimism. It was fun. It was more fun to watch as a fan, them throwing the ball over the yard, than it was to just watch them ground and pound people. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, it was more aesthetically pleasing, but just the dominance of that 17 team. I do think the record comes into play. You had mentioned that, no, they didn't have any blowouts. They were more competitive on the big stage than what the 17 team was. They also never lost to a 5-6 team at home like the 05 team did. If they simply would have beat Michigan State, that 05 team to me jumps all the way up to number 3 at worst, maybe number 2, in my opinion. So it was interesting kind of having that conversation. Their best win that year was over number 11 USC. And it's not just that they blew those teams out. I mean, Notre Dame was beating in 2017 was beating, borderline top 10 teams the way that the 05 team was beating borderline top 25 teams and unranked teams. I mean, you look at Pitt that year, Pitt that season finished the year 5-6. Yeah, they blew out Pitt. That's great. But, that was a ranked win. They finished 5-6. They beat Michigan on the road. Michigan finished 7-5 that year, unranked. They beat number 22 Purdue on the road by 21. Purdue finished that year 5-6. You know what I mean? So, like, a lot of their big wins, like, for example, the 2005 team had 3 ranked wins. Not one of those teams finished the year in the top 25, and only one of them finished with even a winning record. So it was one of those things where there were a lot of – they blew out those teams, but the 17 team blew out a USC team 49-14, and it could have been worse. That finished the year ranked 10th at 11-3. They blew out a NC State team by 3 touchdowns that finished the year ranked in the top 25 and won 9 football games that season. So when you look at it and you say, boy, I mean, a week later, after getting beat by 3 touchdowns at Notre Dame, they played Clemson and only lost by a touchdown. So they were pretty good. They were pretty good that year. And that year they beat, you talk about, well, you can't beat teams this way, that way. And that same year, NC State beat Lamar Jackson and Louisville by 2 touchdowns. So that was the big separator for me. Just the wins that year were far more impressive than the wins from 05. That's what caused me to flip, like you flip from 5 to 4. I know that we had the same reasoning for that. Let's talk about the number 3 team. And this is where I think we might get into some debate. And we'd like to know, I mean, chat's kind of quiet right now. It's like if we want to hear from you on these subjects, we want to hear from you guys. How do you rank the teams? I think the next 3, there can be some debate. I don't know that there's a lot of debate about number 1 per se, but I do think there can be some debate about 3 and 2. Our number 3, Trev, and we agreed on this, was the 2012 team. Finished the year 12-1, played for the national title, went 4-1 against ranked opponents, and their best win was a really fun to watch road win over number 8 Oklahoma. That's our number 3 team. Let's talk about why they're number 3 and maybe why. Well, let's wait till we get to number 2 before we talk about why 2 is ahead of number 3. But what did we love about that team beyond just the record?
For me personally, it was my first undefeated season. And it was the first time that I got to watch a dominant football team from start to finish. Now, one of the things that was so hard about the 2012 team was, and I know we talked about like fun not being an overall big time factor. Now, I enjoyed watching Notre Dame go undefeated in hindsight, like being able to say, like, I was a part of the 2012 season. I was in person at the 2012 Pitt game. That was absolutely nuts. And, but I would be lying if I said from start to finish throughout the entire season, every game was fun. Like I did not have fun watching the Purdue game.
Yeah.
Like that was rough. Like I know they beat Michigan at home, and that was like the great game because they all had the lays for Manti Te'o, but it was 13-6.
Right.
So it's like that's what was tough about it. But then once you start peeling back some of the layers, there was levels of dominance shown. And then when the offense was clicking, that's when teams like Oklahoma just stood no chance to beat this football team. But every single week, the defense answered the bell. Yeah. Their worst defensive performance was against Pitt, and turnovers played a big role in that game as well. And so, that was a tough one for me because I went back and forth a lot between 2012 and our number 2 team. But you go undefeated, you play for a national championship. They absolutely deserved a spot in the top 3. The question was just where.
Yeah. I think it's the style of play that was the thing. But to me, the 2012 team was more fun for the storylines than it was the sexy style of play. Like it was one of those things where the Manti run to the title or to the Heisman runner-up was more entertaining. The storylines that like what we came to learn after the fact, I think sometimes taints for some of us the memory of the season where before that was in our minds, that was such a great storyline. That season was a great storyline. It was the Notre Dame is back moment where they're truly back, where they're actually beating those good teams on the road, like Michigan at home, but then going on the road and beating Oklahoma in a game that maybe not a lot of people thought they were going to win. It was, and then finally you slayed the Stanford Dragon. I didn't care how you did it. I didn't care if it was 3-0 in a monsoon. Just beat Stanford. I mean, that's kind of how it was back then. Brian Kelly'd never beaten Stanford. They hadn't beaten Stanford. I think what I remember saying that year is the only group of players on the roster that had been in a game where they beat Stanford were the fifth-year seniors. That was it, because they lost in 9, 10, and 11. And so it was the fifth-year seniors were the only, Cap, Ron, Lewis, Morris class. The 08 class is the only class that had played in a game where they beat Stanford in a game. So I think those things were all were made it fun for me as an adult. I also was coaching that year, so there was less, pressure for the season because I was a fan, not someone covering the team. I could just kind of enjoy the season. I was at the Pitt game. I remember that crazy comeback from that game. But that's kind of how the whole season was. It was like you were always kind of like hanging on. You're like, oh, my gosh, hold this BYU team off and get this win against Purdue. I hope you can beat Michigan. I hope you can beat Stanford. There were so many great games. And even the 18-point win over Oklahoma was 13-13 in the fourth quarter. But I also think that game showed what I loved about that team. Very next play, bootleg, bomb, Chris Brown. Notre Dame that team just had no quit in them. Just had no quit in them in the regular season. And that's what made it maybe a more fun season from a storyline standpoint, but it wasn't sexy football at all. It wasn't sexy football, even kind of close. Let's talk about the number 2 team on their schedule, Trev. And based on some comments in the chat, I do think that there is some debate about who's number 1, which is going to make it interesting. So we'll have to state our case why we have these two teams different. 2018 is our number 2 team. And when I look at the 2018 team, Trev, some of the stuff is obvious, right? You're talking about a team that went 4-1 against top 25 teams. You're talking about a team whose best win was over number 7 Stanford. Now, that number 7 Stanford team ended up not being as good as maybe some other teams we thought that they beat that year. There's a game there that against a ranked team that a team that was unranked that finished ranked. So like Stanford finished unranked, but Northwestern finished ranked. So you kind of flip those. So they still had 4 ranked wins that year. You beat a number 15 Syracuse, finished ranked 15th Syracuse, who won 10 games. You beat them 36-3. You beat a Northwestern team on the road that won 9 games that year, played for the Big Ten title, finished 19 on the coaches poll and 21 on the AP poll, and you went on the road and beat them, by 10 points. You beat a Michigan team that year that finished 10-3 and ranked 14th. But going into the last game of the year, we had people like Kirk Herbstreit trying to argue that team should have been ranked higher than Notre Dame at the end of the year. And you beat them convincingly. If you don't have 2 dumb plays, one of which you let a kick return come back, they might blow Michigan out that game. It's a very talented team. That team was, I would argue, is the most talented on both sides of the ball. Certainly the most talented defensive team we've seen until very recently. And they were a dominant team for the most part. Obviously, early in the year, they weren't dominant. But once they made the move to Ian Book, a quarterback, I mean, their wins were by 29, 21, 22-5, 22-10, 29-33, and then you had the 7-point win against USC where it was 24-10. When Tony Jones hit that big play, it made it 24-10. USC came down and scored last. That's why they're number 2. I'm going to talk about 24, and then I'll let you and I talk about 24. You talk about 18, what you liked. But I want to go to 24, what we liked about that team, and then we'll discuss what separated the 3, Trev. But let's talk about 2018 first and what you liked about that team besides just, they were dominant, talented, and got on the big stage. They were part of the 14 playoff. Their first trip in the 14 playoff.
Yeah, up to this point with all the other teams that we talked about, I think 2018 had the most balance of talent on either side of the ball. In 2005, it was like the defense was fine. The offense was fantastic. In 2017, the offense was good. The rushing attack was phenomenal, but the defense was lights out. Mm-hmm. And then when you talk about 2012, the defense was outstanding and the offense was very similar to 2017. It was like, it was good. The rushing attack was phenomenal, but this was the first Notre Dame team on this list for me that I can look at it as like they could beat you offensively or defensively. And I think that they showed that throughout the regular season because, a lot of people just only pay attention to how the Clemson game ended, or they'll bring up 1914 Pitt. And it's like, but they've shown that they can win in multiple different ways.
Yeah.
They absolutely shut down Stanford while still putting up 38 points. They absolutely shut down a ranked Syracuse team and still put up 36 points. Whereas in previous years, I would contend that I think the defense would hold them to like 3 points or to 10 points. The offense would then just score 17 points, whereas this offense was putting up 30. They were putting up 35. They were putting up 40. And so I think that this was the most balanced of teams. And up to this point, it was the most, and I know the final score doesn't reflect it, it was the most competitive that a Brian Kelly-led team was in a big postseason game like this.
For a time, yeah. I mean, that game was similar to how the Notre Dame Georgia game in the Sugar Bowl, where it was a competitive game outside of 2 minutes. This game was competitive outside of about 8 minutes. And it was that 8 minutes when Julian Love went down. And all of a sudden, I think it was a 10-7 game a 10-3 game becomes a 24-3 game like that. And at that point in time, like the long touchdown run from Travis Etienne at the end of the game, that's because Notre Dame have taken some chances because they had to try to force turnover, missed a gap, and he takes it to the house. They weren't hitting them like that if it's not for that play. And that's what makes that game so disappointing. It's because the offense couldn't compete on the biggest stage. And that's what will be something that I talk about. But that was an incredibly talented football team in 2018. I mean, you had legit NFL receivers. You had a legit NFL running back. You had a future starting offensive lineman in the NFL. Our defensive line had 5 defensive ends that played in the NFL. You had a first-round draft pick, a D tackle.
It was the first legit secondary that Notre Dame had too. I mean, from top to bottom, like other secondaries had like a guy here or 2 guys here. But that was,
the closest thing they had to it was the 2011 team that they completely wasted. It had Harrison Smith and Jamor Slaughter and Zeke Mata and Robert Blanton and Gary Gray that they just completely wasted. This team had that talent, but then played to their potential. They didn't. What that team lacked was depth. And that's something that we're going to talk about here when we get to our number one. But, I mean, that team was dominant, big wins over team that stayed ranked, not like 05 where they beat a bunch of, huge wins over ranked teams that ended up 5-6 or 7-5. I mean, they beat teams that ended up still being pretty good. And they played a lot of spotlight games that year too, Trev. I mean, the Michigan game was a big spotlight game. Stanford was 7 versus 8. Going on the road and playing a ranked Virginia Tech team and Enter the Sandman and all that kind of stuff. And, night game on national TV against Northwestern, the Syracuse game, being in Yankee Stadium, the USC game was a night game. Notre Dame wins it. They're in the playoffs. I mean, they stepped up in every instance and played. And they showed that year too. What I liked about that team is they weren't front runners. They weren't just front runners. They just jumped on everybody and just blew everybody out. They had to win ugly sometimes, and I like that. People like to use that as some sort of like knock on them, but I think the battle that LSU had early against Texas was good for them. It was a good learning experience for them, as was the game against Auburn. You learn things about your team that you can then apply down the road, and we saw that with Notre Dame that year, obviously in the Pitt game, needing to come back against Pitt, but then also late in the year when USC jumped on them 10-0 in that game. And to see that team bounce back and battle and do the things that they did, you learned a lot about that football team. And those are things that you see that team had some character. They had some character, and that made them fun to watch as well. That was a very entertaining season. That was a fun team to watch until the Cotton Bowl. And that's one of the reasons this team ranks up number 3. Now let's talk about our number 1 team, and then we'll discuss what separated 1, 2, and 3 for us. Number 1 team is 2024. You say, well, other teams made the postseason. Yeah, but this one made the postseason and went on a run. You talk about levels of dominance. This is a team that had a 13-game winning streak, something no other team had in a season. This is a team that had big wins over really good teams and tough environments. This is a team that had to overcome more adversity in season than any team that we've talked about by a mile. You talk about losing your anticipated starting left tackle in the first week of fall camp. You lose your starting defensive end by game 3. You lose his backup 2 games later. You lose your All-American cornerback by game 6. You lose your All-American D tackle in the first round of the playoffs. Just all year, this team could not catch a break in a lot of ways. But the depth, this team had more depth than any team we've talked about by a mile. By a mile. And that's what makes this very, very different. Very different. And we'll respond to a couple of the odd comments about this team from some members in the chat. But this team, to me, showed all the marks. For 15 of the 16 games, they were better than anybody on this list. And I understand one of the big knocks is going to be Northern Illinois. But to me, you more than made up for that because this team did 2 things in an 8-day span that all those other teams never did. And that's win big postseason games. This team won 3 big postseason games, which is 3 more than any Notre Dame team has won since 1993. Think about that. You can talk about, well, somebody said, well, they didn't play a 2012 Bama. Who cares? That 2012 team would not have gone 11-1 against the schedule that Notre Dame played. They definitely wouldn't have gone to the postseason and won 3 games. If you want to play that hypothetical scenario, here's what this team did. That team, in a matter of a month, won more big games in a month than Notre Dame had won in the previous 20 seasons combined. Combined. How many, Trev, from 1994 to 2023, 20 football seasons. How many New Year's Six, how many playoff or postseason wins where championships were on the line or was a New Year's Six game did Notre Dame win? 0.
The only thing that I have to correct you on that is that's not 20 years. That's 30 years, brother.
30 years. Sorry, 30 years.
That's
yes,
I mean, to your point, though.
Yes, 30 years. Yes, my math is usually pretty good, but today was sucked. But no, 30 years. Think 30 years. They had 0 New Year's Six playoff or title game wins. The 24 team had 3 in a month, 2 in an 8-day period. Beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, beat Penn State in the Orange Bowl. Like this team did things that no other team came even close to doing. Not even close. And did so a shell of themselves by the time. I mean, think about that. Here's the players that did not play for Notre Dame against Georgia. Think about this. Charles Jagasol, Ashton Craig, Riley Mills, Boubacar Traore, Jordan Patelho, Benjamin Morrison. I think I'm missing some people from this list, I believe, Trevor. But that's a pretty good list, just the guys that I can remember. And in the postseason, your star running back is playing with a giant brace on his knee. That's who Notre Dame played with in the postseason when they beat Georgia by 13 on the road and then went and beat Penn State in the Orange Bowl, a team that had more talent in their starting lineup than Notre Dame did by that time. Like, nobody can come close to accomplishing the things. So we talked about 2018, 4-1 against ranked opponents. 2012, 4-1 against ranked opponents. The 2024 team was 7-1 against ranked opponents. 7-1. Obviously beat Texas A&M on the road. That was obviously a big one. They beat Louisville that year, who was a top 15 football team. Beat them. Beat Army. Blew out, let me be clear. Blew out Army and Navy that season, who were very good football teams that year. And then, of course, going to the postseason and beat a top 10 Indiana team, beat number 8 Indiana, beat number 2 Georgia, beat number 4 Penn State. That's pretty good, Trev. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
What separated 2024 from all the other teams is once you got to the postseason, you didn't have to use any ifs.
Yeah.
Like in 2005, it was like if they counted Anthony Gonzalez's fumble that Zibby returned for a touchdown, then maybe they win. In 2017, they got the win in the postseason, but then you have to talk about, would we have thought differently of this team if they didn't get blown out by Miami by 33 points, or if they were able to beat Stanford at the end of the year? 2012, it was man, if they were more prepared to play Bama back in 2012. In 2018, it was like, if Julian Love doesn't get hurt. There's no ifs with this team.
Yeah.
The only if with this team is if they had all those guys, do they win the championship?
So, like, Chief is going off, and the Chief Burr's going off the chat. Oh, you're telling me the 2018 Notre Dame wouldn't have playoff wins in a 12-team format? I have no idea. Neither do you. You think they would have, but you don't know. We're not arguing hypothetically if you could transport this team, if you could have Doctor Strange or Wong go back, use a freaking magic ring from Marvel to go back to 2018 and open up a big old portal and bring the 2018 back to 24. Could they have done what the 24 team did? I don't know. Maybe. I think so. I don't know. But they didn't. That's the whole point. They didn't. This team did. That team got in the Final Four and got smacked. This 24 team got to the Final Four and won a game. Well, they have to play a 20. Okay, fine. But you don't know if they would have fared any different. Do you really want to pound on the table that a Brian Kelly coached football team would have stepped up and gone to the Sugar Bowl and beat Georgia? Is that really what you want to talk about? You really think that with Brian Kelly as the head football coach, that the 2018 team would have gone to a semifinal game in the Sugar Bowl against the SEC champ and won? You really want to argue that? You really think Brian Kelly's team would have beat Penn State in the semifinals? No, they wouldn't have. Did they have the talent to do so? Of course. On the field. But there's a lot of teams that were that way. Just like the 2015 team should have beat Clemson. The 28-15 team should have beat Stanford. But they didn't. Because they weren't that team because of their head coach. So when you talk about best teams, you can talk all the hypotheticals as you want, but are you trading head coaches? Because I'm not putting my faith on Brian Kelly winning 3 playoff games. Are you kidding me? What evidence do you have that Brian Kelly would have made a playoff run? What evidence do you have? You have none. I have a lot. My evidence is nothing because he did nothing. So no, you can miss me with that. But the reality is when you're talking about best team, this isn't a hypothetical conversation. Who you think would have done this, that, or the other thing on that same schedule, against that same schedule. The point is, we know what they did. And I'm sorry, even if you want to play the hypothetical game, no, I don't think the 2018 team would have gone on a playoff run. They might have won a game. They'd have beat Indiana. I can confidently say that. But what evidence do you think there is that the 2018 team would have gone to the Sugar Bowl and beaten the number 2 team in the country that year? What evidence do you have? You have none. You actually have a ton of evidence to the contrary. So, yes, best team, even in a hypothetical, 24 was still better than 2018 in a hypothetical. Why? Because we know that team could go down to Georgia, go down to Louisiana in a big game and win by double digits. Brian Kelly's claim to fame was that they lost to Clemson by less than what Alabama lost to Clemson. That they lost to Alabama by less than what Ohio State lost to Alabama. That's literally the argument that Brian Kelly supporters will make for how good his teams were. That's the whole point. So this is the thing. You're arguing a lot of thinks, Chief. The reality is we know what Brian Kelly did on those stages. You don't have to guess. That's part of what made those teams those teams. So, yes, if the 2018 could get transported by Doctor Strange to 24 and they had the current coaching staff and that, all these different things that don't actually fit that team, yes, they could have gone on a run and won games. But they didn't. I love the 2018 team too, but they were still coached by Brian Kelly, and they still were coached by a guy who never had that team ready to play. So I'm sorry. I mean, that was an incredibly talented team. That was a fun year, but their accomplishments don't come anywhere close to what the 2024 team did. And if you did match them up head to head, I'd take the 24 team. Do you know why I'd take the 24 team? Because I got a lot more faith that coaching staff is going to have that team ready to play, then the 2018 coaching staff is going to have them ready to play in a postseason game. Somebody said, what is your favorite BK quote? I don't know, whatever he said when he was leaving Notre Dame. That's my favorite BK quote. Whatever his statement was, letting people know he was leaving. So that's the whole point. You want to talk about what we know. Who are the best teams? I'll take the 24 team in a matchup against the 2018 team in a big game. Do you know why? Because I watched the 24 team win big games. I didn't watch the 2018 team win those big games. Name me one team in 2018 that they beat where you could argue the talent on that other team was equal or maybe better than that team. Name me one. I don't think Michigan was. That's the only one that maybe. They beat them by a touchdown. Everybody else they beat, that's who they're supposed to beat because that's who Brian Kelly was. They beat the teams they're supposed to. Anybody on his level talent-wise, they didn't beat. This team did. I bet you there's a lot more first and second round draft picks on that Georgia roster than there was on Notre Dame's because there was no Riley Leonard or Riley Mills. There was no Benjamin Morrison. There was no Boubacar Traore. There was no Charles Jagasol. There was no Ashton Craig.
I mean,
that's why.
That's the difference right there. The 2018 team folded because they lost a guy.
A guy for a half a quarter.
They lost a guy for half a quarter, and that game went from 10-3 to 24-3.
Quickly.
Notre Dame lost almost half a two deep worth of players over the course of the season, and they still made a run to the championship. Like, it's just like, Chief, I understand the point that you're trying to make, and that it's like, but I would take the 18 Clemson team over Georgia 24, but it's like that we're not arguing in realities here.
Right.
Like, I'm sure Clemson in 2019 was telling people, it's like, but none of you guys had to play LSU in 2019. It's like, yeah, but you did.
Right.
Like, that's the reality of the situation. Like, we could talk about if Clemson, if you take the 19 team and transported it to 2020, they could have won it. You know what I mean? But
heck yeah, man.
But that's just, it's going against what we've seen. I mean,
right.
Like a lot of the confusion, I think, with a lot of people sometimes, and this isn't just specific to Chief, it's Brian, it's something you and I actually talked about before the show. It was best teams versus like most talented teams. Like people talk about that with quarterbacks all the time. Mm-hmm. You could argue that Notre Dame's best and most talented team, you could argue, especially in their starting lineup, is still to this day 2015 talent top to bottom in a starting lineup.
No. You know who I think you should argue it is? It's 2011.
Yeah, exactly. 2011. From top to bottom, yeah, 100%.
2011. 2015 might be next, to your point.
Yeah, but what makes a good team? Like, I think the 2025 roster at Notre Dame was more talented than the 2024 roster from top to bottom. But 2024 was a better team because what makes a team? It's fighting through adversity. It's winning those games that you know what I mean? So like, that's what that's the difference. So Chief, maybe your confusion is like most talented teams versus best teams. Like maybe it's something like that, but maybe no, it's 24 all day. And that's where we get into
part of it goes back to the fact that team threw the ball a lot more than this 24 team did. Coleman Smith has a great point too, Trevor. I got more faith in Riley Leonard than Ian Book, basically, is what he's saying, which is another factor. Look, I'm not trying to. Ian Book did a heck of a job at Notre Dame in a lot of ways, but the reality is these were not his best moments. These were not his big moments. When the offensive line struggled, he was going to struggle, and that was not the case for Riley Leonard. We had a poll on our board the other day about who would you want in a big moment, Ian Book or Riley Leonard, and I was shocked by the results. That how many IB members picked Riley Leonard. And I think the reason why is because a lot of those people that picked Riley Leonard love Ian Book, rightfully so. But they just saw Riley Leonard do it on a big stage where just Ian Book never did. Yeah, that's the reality of it. So that's kind of what I love, Trev. But the reason the 2012 team is not really in the conversation and why I think there ultimately was some distance between them and the next two teams is because I just think when you look at that 2012 team, as fun of a season as it was, they just didn't beat the same caliber teams that the 2024 team beat, and they didn't have the talent that the 2018 team did. And when you get to that big stage, the final score wasn't a lot. It was only 1 point difference. 2012 got beat by 28, 2018 got beat by 27. But for 50 of those 60 minutes, the 2018 Notre Dame team played with the 2018 Clemson team for 50 minutes. It's just that 10-minute stretch, the end of the second, beginning of the third, that broke it open, where the 2012 team was outmatched against Alabama from start to finish. And I do think you can stack up that 2018 Clemson team against the 2012 Alabama team. Like, no, the teams Notre Dame beat last in 2024 weren't as good as those two teams. That doesn't have anything to do with how good the Notre Dame teams were. I would argue that 24 Notre Dame would have been more competitive in at least one of those games, if not both, than what the 2018 and 2012 teams were, because they were coached better and they had the depth in the secondary. That 24 secondary, even without Benjamin Morrison, would have done as good of a job, if not better, than what the 2018 secondary did. That's the difference. So, but the 2012 team just wasn't competitive, and the 2018 was far at the bottom. I think, look, you want to talk about star power? I don't know that Notre Dame had in the last 30 years a team with more star power than the 2012 team. In the top 3 or 4, Manti, Zach Martin, Tyler Eifert, like that's Louis Nick, Stephon Tuitt, like the top 5. But the difference is 6 to 30 isn't close. It's 18, it's 24, it's those teams. So those are things that I look at, Trev, and say that's what separates 12 and 18 for me. The 18 team was just far more dominant than what the 2012 team was. And the 24 team also, you could match the talent in a lot of areas, but that team was more accomplished. That team had way bigger wins, and that team was coached way better. And I think sometimes we discount how talented the 24 team was. I think there's some people that viewed the 24 team as like this scrappy, blue-collar, 2012-ish type of team that just didn't really have the horses. Yeah, they did. There's a lot of guys that are going to be high draft picks that were on that football team, that were really good football players that were on that 2024 football team, that I don't even know if we as fans necessarily realize that. So that's why we rank those teams where we have them.
100%. We did have a couple of honorable mention teams. I do know that.
We'll work those pretty quick, Trev. Go ahead, and if you want to start talking to them.
Yeah, first one I'll ping pong back to you, just because this was a little bit before my time of fandom, but it was the 2002 Notre Dame teams in that.
That was Ty's first team. It was a really fun season. I think it was kind of like the 05 season for some people, where it was like, okay, we're kind of back. You know, they started the season with a 22-0 win over a ranked Maryland team. They beat number 7 Michigan 25-23. They beat a ranked Air Force team. They went on the road and beat number 11 Florida State to start the season 8-0. Jumped all the way up to number 4 in the rankings, and then lost at home to Boston College before they dropped the last 2 games, got blown out by USC, and they got blown out by Phillip Rivers and NC State in the Gator Bowl. The reason that team doesn't quite stack up, Trev, is that they weren't as dominant that year as a lot of other teams. I mean, they beat Maryland 22-0. They beat Purdue by 7. They beat Michigan by 2. Maryland was a really good team that year, finished 11-3. That was a good Maryland team. Michigan was a really good team that year, finished number 9. So those weren't cheap wins. They beat a ranked Air Force team that year by only a touchdown. They finished unranked. They beat Florida State that year, who was ranked number 11, finished the year 9-5 and ranked 21st. So it kind of took a little bit away from it. But then you lose at home to a Boston College team that you had just no business losing for. It was an unranked 9-win, but an unranked Boston College team. But then when you finally played like a really good team, they got blown out. So that team was honorable mention. It was still a great year, still a fun year. Great defense in 2002 as well. That was the Glenn Earl, Jerome Sapp, Vontez Dove, Courtney Watts. You had the great D tackles, and Daryl. It was Cedric Hilliard and Daryl Campbell. Like, that was a fun season to watch, but it wasn't quite up to the same level as some of those other teams were. And then I know and the 06 team too, Trev, was a 10-win team, played in the big bowl game, but they got blown out by the only 3 good teams they played all year. They weren't nearly as good as they were in 05, in my opinion.
Yeah, the best way that I can explain the 2006 team is it was basically the 05 team, just not as good. Like in key areas. Like, respect to some of the previous linebackers that came through, like Mo Crum and Joe Brockington and some of those guys. They weren't Corey Mays and Brandon Hoyt.
Most underrated linebacker duo in my lifetime is Corey
100%.
Mays and Brandon Hoyt.
Dude, they were so good. They were so good. And, you know, like you mentioned before, like the Samardzija Stovall duo was better than the Samardzija McKnight duo. Quinn statistically put up some better numbers that year. Like I think he passed for more touchdowns, but he didn't pass for more yards. Like Darius Walker was essentially the same guy, a good running back. I don't want to sound like he was the same guy. He sucked, but he was kind of the same. But then in other areas, you just weren't as good. The offensive line took a step back.
Mark LaVore and Dan Stevenson leaving was, you were starting a true freshman at right tackle. And and that team just didn't have the same. There just was something missing. And you could see it in the opener against Georgia Tech. There was just something missing from that football team that they didn't have that juice, that spark. Now, I think we all maybe believed it was there. The Georgia Tech game was bad, but then they went out and blasted a ranked Penn State team who the previous year was really good. They ended up not being quite as good that year, and it was a little bit of fool's gold. And then we found out real quick against Michigan that this team is just not the same team. Just not the same football team as they were in 05. But and then, of course, they got smacked by USC at the end of the year, got blown out by LSU in the bowl game. That team didn't belong. I mean, what's the big win from that year? What's the big, this is what you're building your team's resume around if you had a captain from the 06 team defending his team, what would be the big win that they could hang their hat on that year?
The comeback against Michigan State on the road, it would have to be.
Yeah. Right. But like that Michigan State team that year, Trev, was a great win. That team finished 4-8. Like I'd ask, well, why were you down 30, 31 to 14 to a team that went 4-8? And then you say, okay, Penn State, that team finished 9-4, ranked number 24 in the rankings. Georgia Tech was a 9-win team that year, went 9-5, finished unranked. Like you don't have a big game to hang your hat on. I mean, you had some great comebacks. You also had the great comeback against UCLA. That was a 7-6 UCLA team that the week before you beat them, they lost to Oregon by 10, and then the week after you beat them, they lost to Washington State by 22, and then the next week they lost to Cal by 14, and they also lost to Florida State by 17. They lost to Washington by 10. You were the only good. They ended up beating you. That was a weird. Remember they beat USC like 13-9 at the end of the year. That year was a really weird game. But there's just no big win to hang their hat on, or even a great loss to hang your hat on like you had in 05. And that's what hurt that team, in my opinion. Some other teams on our list, Trev. So we obviously had 2002, 2006. 2015 was on there. That might be the most talented team, but the reality is when you're 1-3 against top 25 opponents, you don't belong on this list. Now, they were competitive in 2 of those 3 losses, but when your big win is Temple or Navy, that's your best win was over Temple or Navy, you don't belong in a list of top 5 teams. Top 5 most talented team? Maybe. I would argue, to the point you made earlier, Trev, I think 2011 and 2011, 2015, in the pre-Marcus Freeman era, 2011, 15, 18, those are the 3 teams that I think are in the conversation of who was the most talented Notre Dame teams post post Lou Holtz. You can maybe throw 05. I think you throw 05 in there. That team was pretty talented. But when you're 1-3 against ranked opponents and your best wins are either Temple or Navy, I can't go with you as one of the 5 best. You had to give me something more than that. Talented wise, sure. Best team? No, not a best team.
No, talented for sure. The problem with that team is they were a little bit smoke and mirrors almost because of how talented they were. I think we as fans remember the individual moments from that season, but you could argue that 2015 team peaked in week 1 against Texas at home when they beat them by 35 points. Because then after that, it was like, okay, well, you beat Virginia by a touchdown, and it was a game where Malik got hurt, but everybody remembers that individual play of Will Fuller catching that touchdown. But it was like, it seemed like the offense and the defense were never really gelling on the same day. Like the Clemson game was one of the more frustrating losses of the Brian Kelly tenure, in my opinion. It was, you score 30 against Georgia Tech, but then, they had some late garbage time points, but then they give up 22 points on defense. And then finally your defense holds a team like Boston College to 16, your offense scores 19. And so it was just, it never felt like it gelled all at the same time, but that was such a talented team. It's one of the more frustrating coaching jobs from Brian Kelly. That's for sure.
Coleman Smith said, if Malik stays healthy, I think that team does something. I agree. I agree, but they didn't. And that's what separates the 15 team from like the 24 team. The 24 team had a long string of injuries. The 2015 team had some injuries. You had Sean Crawford got hurt, Jerron Jones got hurt, Malik Zaire got hurt, Durham Smythe got hurt, Taring Folks got hurt. It's no different than what the 2024 team had to deal with. And they still went out and did what they needed to do to win those football games. So I agree with that. And then last couple, 2020, that was a great year. That was without a doubt Brian Kelly's best coaching job, like by far. Keeping that team together through the COVID stuff, no spring ball. You missed 2 weeks of the season because you had an outbreak, and just all the different things that went into that season, all the protocols you had to do. I mean, that was a challenging season for a lot of football teams, and Brian Kelly did a great job of and his staff did a great job of keeping that team together. And the big win over Clemson obviously was a huge win, number one Clemson. I've never given him the credit for that as a typical win over number one, because they didn't have. You didn't have Mike Jones. You didn't have the Davis kid at D tackle. And then, of course, you didn't have Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. When they played a healthy Clemson team in the ACC title game, they got smacked, because that's kind of who Brian Kelly is. I mean, you should have beat that team by more than a touchdown in overtime if you really think about it. But that was a really good coaching job for the most part. Like from a head coaching, keeping a team together standpoint, I think he did a great job there. And then the last team we'll briefly talk about, Trevor, is the 25 team. I think if we're talking most talented teams, I think 25 is the current team that we would put. Like I said, the talented teams I said is pre-Marcus Freeman. I don't think there's much doubt that the 25 team was Marcus Freeman's most talented team. They just and they were dominant. It's also the most dominant team in their wins. The problem is it's a lot like some of the teams in the 15 team. What's the big win you're hanging your hat on? You lost to the two best teams you played. Now, they were great games, and you went down to the wire, but you lost to the two best teams that you played. And you didn't play great in either one of them. What's your win? Beating a 9-4 USC?
Yeah.
Like that's your big win.
Well, and you lost to both of them, and you were favorites in both of them on FanDuel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other unfortunate thing. So it's not like, if they could have pulled off that win, they maybe could have gone and done so. You were favored to win the Texas A&M game at one point by 9.5 points. Like that's what's so unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, this was every coach has one. I think every top coach has one. I think you could say that about Nick Saban during his time at Alabama, Dabo Swinney at Clemson. You got Ryan Day at Ohio State right now. This was Marcus Freeman's what if season. What if you just beat one of Texas A&M or Miami? What if you played Tay Johnson more than 9 snaps in game 1? What if you made the decision to go with Dallas Golden at the nickel in game 2? What if, so that's what it came down to. But definitely deserves to be up there. Final question, Brian, where do you think, if they have the season that we think that they can, where will the 2016 team fall on this?
The ceiling for this team is number one, because this team has the potential to win it all, or at least get to the title game and not have a Northern Illinois caliber loss. They can be number one without winning a title, because none of the teams in the top 5 won a title. So I think if this team is any lower than second, I'll be very disappointed, honestly, with that team. I think it has a chance to be number one. The floor of this team, with some things, I think is probably third. This team should be better than 2012 Notre Dame. I think you could say they, at the floor, are on par with 24 and 18. That's where I think the floor. So this team should be one of the best we've seen from Notre Dame. Certainly most talented. I don't know that that's even all that debatable. Even with the losses they had at running back, this is going to be an incredibly talented football team. Can they turn that talent into production and wins? That's going to be the big question. And you don't always do that. I mean, look, the 2019 LSU team that was so great was literally made up of the same players they had in 2018 when their offense scored barely 30 points a game. Just because you have talent doesn't mean you can put it all together. Sometimes you need the right people mixing the ingredients, which, a Joe Brady can come in and, and kind of have that impact. But it was basically the same team both years. And one team was generational, one team was good, but not great. And that's the difference. So, Trev, we're going to do a quick mailbag here, because we did get some super chats and some questions in, but this won't be a full mailbag because we did go very long. in some of the segments that we did discuss. The team wins one went a lot further, a lot longer than I think that maybe we thought it was going to go. I didn't expect that one to go an hour. And because I think we got into some more debates about it than I thought we were going to get into. But I did want to start off here with David Smith with a big super chat. Said hashtag Jackson Vaughn, hashtag Go Irish, hashtag need season tickets. Definitely excited about that as well. And yesterday during the show, here's a little nugget. Yesterday during the show, I'd mentioned the family that Jackson Vaughn comes from. I just was told this today. He has a brother named Noah who plays running back at UVA. He's got an older brother named Nathan who is a junior in dental school. And he has this older sister named Naya who is a first-year pre-med student at Rutgers who wants to be a surgeon, and his mom is an engineer. When I told you guys that the Vaughn family was a Notre Dame fit, that's what I'm talking about right there.
Yeah, that'll play.
It's just why it was like, I just don't see how he doesn't end up at Notre Dame, knowing what the support system he has at home. So, yeah, we're excited about it as well, man. Thank you so much for that big old super chat. I really appreciate that. But yeah, getting Jackson Vaughn is a big one. And this is why when recruiting services miss on kids, it bothers me, because I don't think there's the hype and fanfare about this commitment that there should be, because there's so many people that just look at recruiting rankings. If this kid was ranked appropriately, there'd be a lot more excitement. Now, I think our message board's pretty fired up, because I think the IB people have been listening to us tell you how good Jackson Vaughn is, but just around the fan base, I don't see the same excitement because he's not ranked where he should be, which is that of a top 50 to top 100 player, easily, with 5-star upside.
Without a doubt.
Did you want to comment at all on his commitment, since you weren't able to be on the show at all, or how you feel?
Yeah, no, I mean,
if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's another huge commitment. You're bringing in another big Jersey commit. I had an article come out about that this morning, about the impact that Notre Dame is having in New Jersey. You got Aiden O'Neal, obviously Olu Olubabola, and now you bring in Jackson Vaughn from that private school league, a place that has had a lot of success for Notre Dame, and I don't see any signs of that slowing down. So class impact, that's huge. But, you know, you needed a long – I love the combination that Jackson Vaughn has between strength and speed on the edge.
Yes, for a younger kid.
Yes,
I was also found out he was a true sophomore last year. He was not a kid that was held back in the 6th grade or 8th grade. Like, he is on pace as a normal sophomore. He's just an advanced kid.
Yeah,
and you kind of understand why. His
skill set is very impressive. I think he has an advanced football IQ. Like, it makes sense why he reclassified. I mean, he fits the mold of the Rodney Dunhams, the Ebenezer Utades, the current players that they have in the room. He will need a little bit more time. Like, he's not going to be like out the box ready to go in 2027 because he did reclassify. But I mean, he has the talent where it wouldn't surprise me if he had an Ebenezer Utade type of spring jump where we're like, yeah, he'll play. I mean, he's a talented kid.
Yep. So we had a comment, Trev, and Raymond Hartons with Super Chat said, I support Willie. Willie McBride said, off topic, but I wanted to throw some flowers at Trevor. In my opinion, he has made tremendous progress with his hosting duties since his IB debut. So
Thank you, Willie.
To get that out there to you as well. We also had a super chat from Raymond. He said, I wanted to make that last mailbag a super chat question, and this is that question he was referring to.
As of now, Notre Dame would have to win 16 games without the bye to win the title. If it goes to 24, how many games would Notre Dame have to play without a bye to win a title?
Well, part of that, Raymond, depends on their seeding and how the format of the 16 team goes. I've heard some people say they wanted to do like the Big Ten had I think the Big Ten maybe it was Big Ten that released a 16 team format that actually had buys. Just stupid. Yeah. Like, why exactly? Stupid.
So what would that like the first 2 teams get a bye then? Like, how would that have been?
And then you'd go to, I don't know, dude. It was so dumb. So dumb. But it's the freaking Big Ten. But so that the format would matter too. But if they do it how smart people do it, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to create more games. More buys means more rounds, more games, more money. But if you do it as a typical 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, basically the way that it would work, again, it also depends on, there's a lot of things that determines. Does a 16-team playoff result in them getting rid of conference championships? There's a whole lot of different things that factor into this, Trev, that would make it a little bit difficult to respond to. Do they adapt the AFC go right into the playoffs thing? There's a lot of things that you'd have to kind of figure out. But basically, in a 16-team playoff, Notre Dame would have to win 16 games. So round of 16, round of 8, round of 4 in the title game, 16 teams. So you'd have to win 16 games in either a 17 or 18-week season. Essentially how it would be.
Fair enough.
So they'd have to play 16 games, not 17. If there are buys, then there's a chance they play 17 if they don't get a bye. So that's the thing that factors into it.
This is kind of off topic, but I figured you guys would all find this interesting. I was scrolling through FanDuel to see if there was any like potentials of like a 24 team hypothetical. And I stumbled upon they're releasing game spreads already, even for some later in the year. And they have Notre Dame versus Miami out already. Notre Dame is 6.5 point favorites as of right now, which I think is interesting.
I'm curious how that line changes between now and the couple weeks leading into that game.
Yeah, me too.
I could see it being exactly that. I could see it being closer, and I could see it being wider depending on how certain things play out. It's going to be very interesting. So thank you all for those super chats, especially Mr. Smith. I really, really appreciate that big one very, very much. He's a board member already, so I told him you don't have to do that. You already support us, but we really, really appreciate that. Got one from Coleman Smith.
Was Clausen really supposed to be the next big thing? Looking back at the 07 to 09 teams, they were not that great, putting it nicely.
Yeah, what's that have to do with the quarterback, though? I mean, look, Paul Hornung won a Heisman on a team that had a losing record. Doesn't mean he wasn't a great player. Jimmy Clausen was supposed to be the next big thing, and Jimmy Clausen still had the best passing season I've ever seen from a Notre Dame quarterback, and it wasn't close. I mean, Jimmy Clausen had 450 yards passing in a game, and they lost. It wasn't because of him. His offensive line was trash. The defense was trash. He played on a bad team. I mean, how many times have you and I talked about this, Trev? If Jimmy Clausen comes back in 2010, that Notre Dame football team, I don't know that they lose a game, except maybe to Stanford. They'd probably still lose to Stanford that year, but I don't think they lose to anybody else. You know, I mean, lost to Michigan 38-34. You gave up Daryl Stoneham kick return. They turned Tate Forcier into a Heisman Trophy contender like in a week. Like, you didn't lose that game because of Jimmy Clausen. Jimmy Clausen absolutely ripped Michigan up in that game. He went 25 of 42 for 336 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no picks, and they lost. So that's not on Jimmy Clausen. And I know a lot of people like to kind of blame Jimmy for everything, but they were only even competitive in some of those games because of Jimmy Clausen. So, he sits out some of the Purdue game because he's hurt. He comes off the bench, rallies him for a touchdown. Against USC, he throws for 260 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. They lose 34-27. Against Navy, he throws for 452 yards, and they lose. Against Pitt, he throws for 283 yards, 2 and a touchdown. They lose. Against Connecticut, he throws for 329 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, and they lose. He goes 23 of 30. 76.7% completion rate. Those for 340 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks against Stanford, and they lose 45-38. That wasn't on Jimmy. If you'd have given him the 2010 defense, they're a 9-10 win team. So, yeah, Jimmy was supposed to be the next big thing. He just came to Notre Dame at a terrible time. And I don't think he always had the best attitude. I don't think he was raised in a way by his family, with all due respect. I think he was groomed to be a quarterback as opposed to letting him grow up as a kid that has to have social skills and, leadership ability. I don't think he was he had the best, I don't say upbringing because it wasn't like he was a bad kid, but I think he was a little sheltered and it was too focused on becoming a great quarterback and not enough on, you got to overcome some adversity and things like that. And he was like the third brother to go on to play college football and all those type of things. And they called him the LeBron James of high school football. I mean, there's a lot of hype on Jimmy. And he never lived up to the expectation. Well, no, he wasn't LeBron James, but Jimmy Clausen in his last 2 years at Notre Dame, he threw some picks in 2008. But Jimmy Clausen had some monster games in 2008 as well. And there was a decent number of picks that he had that year that were about the offensive line and about things that didn't necessarily have to do with him. as much as it was other people. I mean, he got destroyed against USC. Threw for 41 yards and 2 picks. Go back and watch that game. He had no chance. I don't care who you put a quarterback in that game. You flip quarterbacks in that game, and Jimmy Clausen tears up Notre Dame, and whoever Notre Dame's quarterback would have been. I think it was Matt Barkley would have had the same stat line that Jimmy Clausen had in that game. So I get frustrated when everybody wants to blame Jimmy Clausen for that team's struggles. Jimmy Clausen is not the reason Notre Dame lost games in 2000. Think about that. They lost games scoring 34, 27, 30, 38 points that year. In every loss, they scored at least 21 points in every loss that season. So Jimmy Clausen isn't the reason that Notre Dame wasn't good that year.
No, I think he just came to Notre Dame at the wrong time. I mean, he got to campus when there was nobody to look up to. There was an older guy in the room, but the culture wasn't as such as what it is now to help bring people along with you. Evan Sharpley was looking to win the job for himself, which I understand. He'd sat behind Brady Quinn. Then he was also paired with a head coach that had no experience how to groom an 18-year-old quarterback. He went from Tom Brady to Brady Quinn. Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, he falls into that, and then he had to be the leader of a team from a very, very young age, but I never questioned his talent.
And that played through a busted-up foot his last year.
Yep.
And he was never the same after that year. He was not a super mobile guy to begin with, but he was more mobile than what he was in the NFL, but he played that whole season on a busted-up foot.
Yeah.
So I have a lot more respect for Jimmy Clausen than I think a lot of Notre Dame fans, and I appreciate the chance to be able to bring that up.
From ND Football 115, it always seems like kids who reclassify end up ranked far below where their talent actually is. Is that understandable due to lack of experience, or the rankings a legitimate issue?
I think it's understandable to see a kid drop or potentially raise up when he reclassifies. The issue that I have is the assumption that a kid always drops. Because what if a kid's going from a really good class to a not very good class, number one? I think some of the issues I have is the arbitrary big drops that we've seen from guys. Jackson Vaughn has no business being outside the top 100. He was a dominant player for 2 years in high school. I understand Champ Mond's dropping. I think he dropped too much going from the number 2 overall player to the 200s, but he did miss all but 4 games of his sophomore season. I understand that. I think the drop was too much. I think that's more of my issue is you see these kids reclassify and they drop 50 to 100 spots. Some of them don't drop hardly at all because there's other reasons for that. But because what you're doing is you're evaluating a kid who's now a quote unquote rising senior off of sophomore film and comparing his sophomore film to that of junior film of everybody else. And oftentimes that's not going to be as good. The reason I think it's nonsense for Jackson Vaughn is, I'm sorry, his sophomore film is every bit as good as a lot of guys' junior film at defensive end. And that's a bit of an issue that I have with his evaluation. So
some of it too, I just wish it would be more relative. You're not going to convince me that Champ Mons was the number 2 overall player in the 2028 class, reclassifies to 27, and now he's the 298th best player.
Even with the injury that cost him much of his sophomore year, that's too big of a drop.
Yeah.
Way too big of a drop. Yeah, I agree. So I think it's not the lack of experience per se. It kind of is indirectly, but it's more about, and I think there's more development as young men from your freshman year of high school to your senior year of high school than there is from your freshman year of college to your senior year of college. They may put on more weight, but you're going from a boy who's probably got acne as a freshman to you're kind of a man, you know what I mean? Like from a physical standpoint, 18. So I think that's part of it as well, is you see a lot more growth from sophomore to junior year with players. I just think in Jackson Vaughn's case, that's nonsense. And On3 should be embarrassed that they have Jackson Vaughn as a 3-star recruit. Embarrassed. But they weren't embarrassed that they're doubling down on not thinking CJ Carr's very good. When they came up with their top 100 and had him in the 80s. It's like they had him behind the kid from Cal. You know, like you guys are doubling down on your stupid evaluation. It's like, why? Like I didn't think Kyron Williams was going to be a good item as like the second or lowest ranked offensive player in the 2019 class. You don't hear me. He wasn't really that good. The offensive line was not. I've said, look, I think this guy's better, that guy's better, but Kyron Williams is a heck of a player at Notre Dame. So I could either. Oh well, yeah. I mean, he had back-to-back 1,000-yard years, but he wasn't that good, and he played on some good teams. Like, no, I've used his yards per carry against him when debating if he's as good as Jeremiah Love and Josh Adams, but he's still a heck of a back. Way better than I thought. I got it wrong. I got his eval wrong. Admit it. It's okay. Everybody does it. But when you then double down and we're now 3 years later and you're still trying to ding Jimmy Clausen because you're dumb freaking high school rankings, like, you just look petty, and then you look dumber and dumber, and people continue to stop taking your stuff seriously. And eventually you're going to lose credibility. But as long as them clicks are coming, baby, then that's all they care about. So it is what it is.
Didn't know that I was muted. From Jay Melvin, Brian, is Notre Dame's roster extremely valuable to other teams? What I mean is, do other Power 4 teams try and overpay to get Notre Dame's current players, starters, and especially backups to transfer to their team?
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about that. I mean, there's guys in the Notre Dame secondary that were offered 7-figure deals to leave Notre Dame that stayed at Notre Dame for not 7-figure deals. Now, not super far off, but yeah, there was a lot of backups that were offered things to leave, and some left and some didn't. And yeah, it's a roster that a lot of people tried to poach this offseason. A lot.
Yeah, I got into a debate with a buddy the other day because we were talking about just like roster sizes and who pays for what rosters. And it's like, you do understand that schools like Ohio State and Notre Dame, a lot of their money and their distribution of funds goes to roster retention.
Yep.
Like, they brought in 8 portal guys. You think they're splitting up $40 million between 8 guys?
Mm-mm.
Like that's not how that works. It's keeping the Leonard Moores, the Adon Schulers, the CJ Carrs. It's like, that's how that stuff works. But yes, they absolutely do try. From Jay Melvin, a two-parter. Will Notre Dame have the best defensive line in 27? Here's the D-line. Dunham, Iwatade, Golden, Hola, Folarunshu, O'Neal, Vaughn, and maybe Park, Cisse, and Fakatu. And is Elijah Golden as talented as the defensive tackles coming in?
They have a chance. If that's their D-line, they have a chance. I mean, that 27 D-line will also have Christopher Burgess.
Shoot. Probably Armel Mukum.
Yeah, maybe Armel. Yeah.
Maybe Tion Gray. Maybe Francis Brew.
Right. Yeah. Sevillano, Logan Thomas, Bryce Young. Dixon. Yeah, so there's a chance, certainly, that they could. And it'll be, certainly possible. Is Elijah Golden as talented as the tackles coming in? Upside-wise, yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I graded Elijah as a top 100 recruit coming in with 5-star upside. I think Elijah Golden is a very talented football player.
Yeah.
There are more things he has to improve upon than maybe some of those other guys. He's got to add more beef to his body than what Braden Parks will have to do or David Folarunshu will have to do. But the ceiling is just as high. And same thing with like Ebenezer Tade. I don't have Ebenezer Tade ranked as high as like Abraham Cisse coming out, but if he maxes out his potential, he's got a chance to be a top 10 NFL draft pick. It's just the ceilings are all similar with him, Vaughn, Dunham, Cisse. They're all very similar. It's just the path to get to that 5-star ceiling for some is a little bit longer than for others. That's really what it comes down to. Same thing with Elijah Golden. His ceiling is every bit as high as David Folarunshu's, in my opinion. I just think, and same thing with Braden Parks. It's just I think there's a little bit longer for Elijah to go to get to that point, just because he had to work to get up to 285, 290, whereas Braden Parks, if they got him, Fakatu, Folarunshu, they're going to show up at that size. If they don't gain any weight, they show up at that size. And that's a difference. That's where some of that stuff comes from.
From All About Saturday, first and foremost, I trust the staff at Notre Dame for making this call on quarterback recruiting, but don't you think that Girard and Mons missing a year of playing experience hurts their development?
I don't think it hurts it. I think it's a risk, but it doesn't necessarily hurt it. I mean, there's guys who only start for 2 years in high school. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger started for 1 year of high school football. Did he even start for one? Actually, now that I think about it, maybe only started one. Not every guy is a 3-4 year starter like Noah Grubbs is. Some guys are only 2-3 year starters. And Champ Mons, for example, is still going to be as long as he doesn't get hurt again, a full 2 year starter that also started 4 games in another season. There's been plenty of big time quarterbacks that only started 2 years of high school football. So, but at the same time, there is some risk involved. I think the calculation for Teddy Girard was, what's going to help him improve as a quarterback? Running the scout team all year where he's, and being in the Notre Dame strength program and learning the offense and being at school at Notre Dame, getting acclimated in that regard, or staying in a high school offense that throws a lot of quick game and is good, but is not going to be the same thing. I think they calculated that he's going to learn more by doing that. I think a lot of times maybe you don't feel this way, but I think sometimes people think when a quarterback's not playing that he just kind of sits around all practice and just watches. But I would imagine if Teddy Gerard's not the number 2, if it was up to me, I'd have him playing scout team for the probably first half of the season and just see what he can do. I mean, they did that with CJ Carr. Let him play. Let him get those live, reps against the first team defense. They're not going to be hitting them, but I think there's a lot of development there. He's going to learn a lot more having to throw every day against Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and DJ McKinney and Dallas Golden and Tate Johnson than he would tearing up high school players. I think that's their calculation. I'm not saying that I'm advocating for that. I think I've made my stance clear. I tend to support letting kids just grow and develop, but every kid is different. And some, like Champ Mons physically, the difference between Champ and Teddy is Champ Mons right now is thicker, 10 pounds and about 5 to 10 pounds heavier than CJ Carr is right now. Like he is a put together young man where Teddy needs time to grow and develop, but Champ's also a young man that needs to mature. And I don't mean mature as in like he's an immature kid. I just mean the general maturity that all kids have to have from their sophomore years to the time they go to high school. Physical maturity is not a huge thing for Champ, but just growing up as a young man and life experience and all those things are things they have to go through. So I think there's same thing there is the development he's going to get at Notre Dame is going to do more for him than another year at Vero Beach High School. I think that's the calculation. And as I said, he's going to have, almost 2.5 years of starting experience under his belt by the time he gets there. The thing that hurt Tyler Buckner is he missed 2 of his last 3 years of high school where he just wasn't playing at all. Where Champ's just like literally skipping a year. It's not like he missed it. He's going to just skip a year, go right from playing his last year to being at Notre Dame. And that's a little bit different. So, again, I don't love it, but I think every young man has to make their decisions, what's best for them. And the Notre Dame coaching staff seems to think that being on campus and going through all those things is going to help to better develop them. We'll find out. I think one thing that I do like is none of them are necessarily being brought in to start right away. That's what hurt JT Daniels. JT was thrown to the fire right away and couldn't grow, and the expectations were sky high. Teddy's not being asked to do that. Now, Champ may, we'll see, because he's going to be stepping into a quote-unquote quarterback competition. Whether or not he'll be able to be part of that or not, I don't know. But I think that's the one thing that's different for like Teddy than was true for like a JT Daniels, for example. So this question is, okay, there you go. You got it.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, is Champ Mons more talented than Teddy or Noah? Is he as talented as the big-time quarterbacks in the 28 class?
I've said this before. I think maybe you missed that show, but I've said this. I've said very clearly that Champ Mons is the most physically talented quarterback that Notre Dame has signed since CJ Carr. And he's got a stronger arm than CJ had at the same age. He's a better athlete than CJ. I think CJ is more talented in some of the other so there's some give and take. Champ's got the athleticism and the power. CJ's got some of the other things, arm speed, arm angles, different things like that. A little bit more advanced reading defenses because he's more advanced than just about anybody in that regard coming out of high school. But he's probably the most physically, just pure physical talent since probably Phil Dracovic in 18. I mean, like that. Like he's extremely gifted. Yeah. That doesn't mean Teddy and Noah are not good talents. And it doesn't mean that he's going to beat them out because they're going to all have a year on him, but just physical talent. I grade him out better and think he's better than anybody since CJ.
From Killer 67, this might be a wild take, but with these last 2 recruiting classes, if all these recruits are the athletes we think they are, this team could rival the 2019 LSU Tigers. We are loaded up.
Part of me wants to be like, let's pump the brakes on that, but I do get it. I mean, just pure potential. If they all reach their full potential, yeah. The reality is that you just don't see you never see anybody where the whole class reaches their full. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's not going to pan out. Somebody's going to transfer. There's going to be some of that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, dude, I get it. I get the excitement. What's different now is I think there's a few teams recruiting like that, not just Notre Dame. So who's able to put it all together? It's going to be a very interesting fascination. But like, I get where he's coming from, Trev. Part of me wants to say, hey guys, let's pump the brakes. But like, dude, this is why you bring in number 1, number 2, number 3 classes every year. So you can say, hey, this team's got a chance to be somewhat special. It's just, will any of these guys be Joe Burrow? That's kind of the like that quarterback's the final ingredient to a lot of this, Trev. You know, it just is.
Yeah, this isn't even just specific to LSU 2019. I would talk about it with different facets of the 2018 Clemson team, the 01 Miami team. I won't be like, if I deem anything close to that LSU 19 team or 18 Clemson team, like it will be after the fact. Like I will never stake my claim that Notre Dame is about to have the next generation of this, because like that's just so tough to predict. Quarterback, I'm with you. I don't know if they're going to have a Jamar Chase and a Justin Jefferson either. They could, but like I don't know what that would be yet. I mean, at this point, like I want them to have another Will Fuller before I'm ready to say that they have a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase. Like, you know, like I'm pumped about the recruiting too. Don't get me wrong, but like I will not be somebody that's like, dude, this could just be LSU 2019, because like it was such a generational run, especially offensively. I think defensively they've passed where they're at. Like, but offensively, like I won't be somebody that stakes that claim. I don't have, I guess you could call it the onions to make that bold of a statement definitively. I don't think you're crazy for saying it. I just won't be somebody that, because that's just such a crazy run.
Yeah, agree. But I understand. I don't think it's nuts.
No,
for Notre Dame fans to be having that conversation, and that would have not been true 2-3 years ago. Like, guys, come on, let's pump the brakes.
From Brandon Plensner, why are we seeing so many reclassifications as of late? Is it mostly due to early NIL opportunities?
I think that's a big driver of it. Yeah, get to college faster, get that NIL money faster. I think that's part of it. I think there's always different reasons for different players. But yeah, and it's something that you can do now. You just didn't see colleges do that in the past. So now that colleges have been forced to kind of do this for different things, then I think there's more of an opportunity to do that. But I think a lot of it is NIL related. Yeah.
Same. From Beefeater ND, would you say Mayer had to shoulder more of the offense than Kmet? Trying to figure out why I thought Mayer would be better in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely had to shoulder more of the load. Cole Kmet was never the number 1 target at Notre Dame. He got to play with Chase Claypool, and in 2019 was the number 1 guy. Cole was number 2. In 2018, you know, Cole was the number 2 tight end. Cole was only starting tight end for 1 year, and that was 2019. He left as a true junior. And then, of course, in his freshman year was 2017. Obviously, he played that year as well, but he wasn't the starting tight end on that team. Michael Mayer was the top tight end on the team from the minute he showed up on campus. And he didn't have the kind of supporting cast around him that Cole Kmet did. That doesn't mean that Cole Kmet wasn't as good. It's just, to answer your question of did he have to shoulder more of the load? Yes, he did. I think Cole and Michael are a little different. I mean, Cole's a little taller than Michael. I think Cole's a little bit more athletic than Michael was as well. I think Michael Mayer's had some injury issues in the NFL, I believe. I've read that. I know he's also had some other off-the-field issues, but he's not played a 17-game season yet. I think that factors a little bit. But I think a lot of it is a little bit of a difference in athleticism can mean a big difference in production in the National Football League. Also, Michael Mayer's gone to a pretty terrible franchise, which hasn't helped either. But, I mean, Cole Kmet went to the Bears, so I can't exactly, act like he went to a great franchise. But I think part of it is because Michael Mayer was so relied upon that maybe some people convinced themselves he was just a way better player than other guys who weren't relied upon as much. But I don't think that was necessarily true. But even with all that being said, I thought Michael Mayer would be better in the NFL as well. I think most people did. You didn't think he would be?
No.
You thought he'd be there?
Yeah, because I think teams would have had a really hard time figuring out what to do with him. Like, mind you, this is coming from somebody that still watches the NFL a lot, and so like he's what he lacks that some other top tight ends in the league have like currently is like he doesn't have like the after the catch ability that like a Travis Kelce did, that a George Kittle
I
did.
completely. I didn't think he was that kind of guy. Let me ask you. So are you saying you thought he was going to be a backup tight end in the NFL?
I thought he would be more serviceable as a number 2 tight end in the NFL just because of his skill sets. Yeah, like I loved him at college. And at the time I even said it, like I hope that I was wrong about it. It's just I think he's going to go to a lot of teams that aren't going to know what to do with him.
Yeah.
Like, and that there's a reason why the year after the Raiders drafted him, they went out and got Brock Bowers too.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, even if Michael Mayer is the player we thought he was, he's still not as good as Brock Bowers in the NFL. Yeah. Like he's much more of an NFL game.
Unfortunately. From Jay Melvin, Brian, if you put CJ Carr on the 2018 team, do you think they win the national championship?
Only if I can bring Marcus Freeman with them and be the head coach. Look, the reality is you still have Brian Kelly as your head football coach. Well, they've scored more than 3 points against Clemson? Maybe, probably. Do they win that game? I don't know. You still had Brian Kelly as your head football coach. Look, at the end of the day, I would say, well, how would Ian Book have been if he had Mike Denbrock as his offensive coordinator and Marcus Freeman as head coach? We don't really answer that. I don't think Ian Book's great at reading defenses. I don't think he ever has been. But I think playing for Brian Kelly hurt him even more. Would it have been different under Mike Denbrock? I don't know. I would rather say that than change quarterbacks because you still have the same head coach.
Agreed 100%. And unfortunately, in that Clemson game, CJ wouldn't have been able to replace Julian Love and stepped in for Dante Vaughn either. Like there's just so many ingredients.
You just would have hoped that he could have maybe kept him in the game until Julian came back. Something like that is all you could have hoped for. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of issues that went beyond. Like Ian Book did not play well that game. But the reality is that he wasn't the only reason they lost that football game. I think the guy on the sidelines was a big part of that as well. Like in that game, like, you know, when you're struggling, why not give Brandon Wimbush a try to kind of spark some things and get it going and then bring Ian Book back in? You just kept doing the same things over and over again and not giving Ian a chance to kind of really develop, you know? So that's very interesting. Let's get to another one, Trev, as we get close to the end of this. Raymond Harton says, Brian, go back to 2018 and see who were the top 12 teams in the rankings, please. So I think he's looking to see what the seeding would have been. So in a 12-team playoff, Trev, Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame, and Oklahoma would have got buys. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then you would have had number 5, Georgia against, and let's go with current teams that are currently G5s. So you would have had number 5, Georgia against number 12, Fresno State. You'd have had number 6, Ohio State against number 11, LSU. Number 7, Michigan against number 10, Florida. And then number 8, UCF against number 9, Washington. So Notre Dame would have played the winner of Ohio State and LSU. This goes back to our debate earlier. I don't know that the 2018 Notre Dame team wins that game, and not because they didn't have the talent to win that, because Brian Kelly's their head football coach. I mean, what if Julian Love misses 2 quarters against Dwayne Haskins in the 2018 Ohio State offense that just ripped people up that year?
Yeah.
I mean, Dwayne Haskins almost threw for 5,000 yards, and they also had J.K. Dobbins on that team. You know, Paris Campbell, K.J. Hill, Terry McLaurin, Johnny. They had 4 receivers with over 650 yards that year. Would that team have, you know, what would that team have done against Notre Dame if, you know, we don't know that team would have won that game. And don't even get me started on, you know, the guys that they had on that team, Trev, on defense in that game. So talent-wise, Notre Dame could play with anybody in 2018. We've said that a million times, but that doesn't mean that you're a great team because you're also still victim of who your football coach is. You know, that team still had Chase Young and Draymond Jones. And, you know, like Notre Dame struggled with the front of Clemson. Well, that front of Chase Young and Draymond Jones and Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bosa, you know, actually, I think he was hurt by then. Robert Landers would have been pretty darn good as well to have to go against. So I don't know that it would have been any different. Like, would you have trusted him to beat number 6 Ohio State? I don't. I trust the players to have the ability to do it, but I don't trust Brian Kelly to be able to lead them to a game. Like, you tell me Brian Kelly's going to go out coach Urban Meyer in a playoff game? Are you kidding me? They never would have got to the semifinals.
That's my opinion. No, I wouldn't have trusted Brian Kelly to beat any team with a number next to its name in the scoreboard in the playoffs because he had never done it. Like, it's hard for me to put blind faith into something that I just know have a track record won't happen. Quite honestly, the opposite. I don't know if Notre Dame would score over 20 points.
Right.
Like, let alone win.
And that just puts a lot of pressure on your defense to go out there and have to just light it up. I mean, that in the 3 games going into the postseason, that Ohio State team scored 52, 62, and 45 points. Like, they had one bad night. One bad Saturday night against Purdue. Outside of that, I mean, they were pretty flipping good that year.
I mean, I would have more faith in Brian Kelly beating the winner of the Ohio State LSU game if they played in like the Music City Bowl than I would the playoffs, because like that bowl wouldn't mean anything. Like that, and then he would have coached to where it didn't. Like he wouldn't have coached not to lose in that game because it didn't matter. Yeah, that's something that we have seen.
Yep. So we said COVID won more ranked games than Kelly. That's really well done. Oh, goodness. Coleman Smith, here we go.
Brian, how do you feel about the calendar continuing to be pushed back? Eventually, we're going to have 2 weeks between the title game and spring ball.
It's stupid. No, I'm with you, Coleman. And that's the one thing that I think the AFC got correct is we got to fix the calendar. I don't love their proposal to fix the calendar, but the goal that they're trying to accomplish, I agree with, which is we've got to shorten the season. We should not be going more than 10 days into January. That's the latest we should be finishing a season. Like, I would have it as like basically the first Saturday that's a week after, within a week of January 1st. Because as I said, I would alter the calendar to where you'd have, you have end of the regular season and then week off. I would get rid of conference championship games, week off. Army, Navy is that first Saturday, December. Then 2 weeks after the regular season, first round playoff. A week after that, second round playoff. Then I would take a break and then have, because that gets you to the semis. Then I would take a break and I would have the semifinals on January 1st. And then the title game is on whatever that first Saturday is following that. So if it's like the 9th, the 10th, it could just be a week. It could be that the first is on a Saturday, and that's fine. But if it's like on the 9th or the 10th or something like that, then that's what I would do. So that would be my goal. Now, if they want to still have it on a Monday, then you could just make it the first Monday after, a week after the semifinals. But now we're done no later than 9th or the 10th of January, and school hasn't started yet, and there's time for the portal and all these other type of things, and the problem solved. I don't think you need to get done by the 1st, but the 1st is when we should be having the semifinals. And then play your championship game a week-ish later. That's what I think. Because you have to have some window, because the 1st is never going to be on a Saturday all the time.
Right.
And then here's the last one that we have here today, Trev.
From Nicholas Grosh, if Carr gets hurt after winning the BYU game, is there a way that Notre Dame could still win a title?
Yeah, there's a way. Yeah, there's a way. Look, if this defense is as good as we think it's going to be, and if the offensive line is as good as we think it's going to be, and the skill talent's as good as we think it's going to be, it's possible. Certainly. It's going to be a whole lot tougher. You're going to have to rely on your offensive line and your defensive line a lot more, and your defense a lot more, but it's possible. The possibility is one of the young quarterbacks develops enough to where he can make enough plays in normal reads to win you some games. He just doesn't get you beat. That's their goal. Just don't get us beat. Is it likely? I don't think it's likely that they win their next, what would be like 8 games without him. But look, this team is going to be good enough to, depending on the draw, they'd still have a shot to make a run. I don't think they'd be a favorite anymore, and it would be a bit of a surprise, but it's possible. I think C.J. Carr is the final ingredient. I don't think Notre Dame's an 8-4 team if you take C.J. Carr off this team. I don't think they're a championship team, but if you've already gotten through BYU with CJ, then your team is built in a way to where you can do that. That's my whole point, Trev, is I look at it and say, hey, I think that there's enough talent and good coaching on this team that they could potentially still win a title. I wouldn't feel great about it.
Yeah.
I'd feel better if he said after Miami.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Because you get into like the draw of it. Guarantee what the committee would do, even though the Ole Miss team, lost their head coach before, and they would bump Notre Dame down in the rankings too, since Notre Dame would be without their starting quarterback. And that would play.
They'd have to have beaten Miami and SMU with their backup quarterback. Actually, now that I think about it, Trev, I don't think doing it after Miami would be as good for Notre Dame. Because they said, well, you beat Miami with CJ Carr, now you don't have them. I actually think they'd have to lose them after BYU. And then if you go out and beat a good Miami team and a good SMU team, I think maybe you don't get dinged as much. But they're still in. They're still in if they're 12-0. I think they're probably still in at 11-1. It's just, are you now traveling in round one?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and
getting dinged isn't
like,
always getting knocked out. Sometimes it's getting dropped down to where now you're going on the road in round one as opposed to hosting a game.
And then do they do the thing that they did to Florida State in 2023 where it's like, yeah, you still won, but your team looks completely different now, where it's like you're undefeated, but you beat Syracuse on the road by like 4, and then you beat SMU at home on senior day by like 6.
Something that chat just said, didn't we go 10-2 at Drew Pine? And that's kind of they didn't go 10-2 at Drew Pine. They went 8-2. 8-2 with Drew Pine. But still, like, the point kind of stands. You did go to the Fiesta Bowl one year with Matt LaVecchio at quarterback. The team is really good, but it'd be a lot tougher. It'd be a lot tougher. But I do think this team is talented enough where it's still a possibility. If you lose Riley Leonard in 2024, you do not make that run.
No, not at all.
Last year, they were probably, if CJ got hurt against A&M, they still go 10-0 and dominate their last 10 opponents. Because you had a kid like Kenny. If Kenny Minchie was still on the roster, I'd be like, absolutely. But you don't have him on the roster anymore. So, yeah. That's a good question. I hope that we never have to find out.
Yeah, 100%. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, I know you guys, like I think I know you do, you haven't gotten enough of us today. So Brian is hopping on to the evening show, kicks off here in a little bit under a half an hour for the segment 1 where they're going to be covering recruiting. And then I will be hopping on with Vince after that. We're going to be taking home the rest of the show. So on your way out of this show, please be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. So Brian and I will see you very soon, and we will see you tomorrow right back here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.